morning, neighbors. This is Long John with the Party Line. We're around from midnight to 5:36 mornings during the week. Monday mornings, we get started about 1, continue through till 5:30, and that means we're around for just about 37 and a half hours every week. During that time, I have the pleasure talking with many interesting people, and the subjects we discuss are sometimes considered by a number of people, possibly 6 out of the 8 listeners, to be offbeat subjects. It will certainly be of interest to almost anybody. If this is the first time that you've been with us, we've talked on the Party Line with people who claim that they've been to other planets. We've talked to people who claim that they've been to Venus, to Mars. We even had a man recently who claims that he's been to the moon. And of course, these things are rather wild, unbelievable by some people, and other people send me cards and letters, and they tell me they believe these things. I just sit here in front of this microphone, talk to these people, and I find that the subjects are interesting. Fantastic Universe is a science fiction publication. But the article we're going to be discussing, I have been told by the author, is not fiction. I've read the article. Everybody sitting around the table has read the article. I think it's a very exciting article, one that should be of interest to all of our listeners. The article was written by one of my guests, Ivan T. Sanderson. The article is entitled Man-Made UFO. The people we have sitting around the table this morning are people that are interested in this particular article. Some of them may agree with Ivan, others may not. We have with us this morning Ivan T. Sanderson, the author of the article that we're going to discuss. Ivan is also an explorer, an eminent zoologist, a radio and TV personality, and he's been active in UFO research for over a quarter of a century. And then we have with us Lester Del Rey. This is a man that I've been trying to get on the program for many months. I don't think Lester is sold on the Party Line, but I'm happy that he was kind enough to join us this morning. Lester Del Rey is the well-known science fiction writer and author of Rockets Through Space and Robots and Changelings. My other guest this morning, Ben Ivkivit, the cybernetician, Hans Stefan Sanderson, editor of Fantastic Universe magazine. And we have 2 gentlemen who are here with us who may agree or disagree with Ivan T. Sanderson's article. One, a gentleman by the name of Sven Oman. That's spelled A-H-M-A-N. Mr. Oman is United States representative of a Swedish newspaper, and he's currently a correspondent to the U.S., also an expert on European affairs. And then we have a gentleman with us who is a former officer of the Russian Army and for a time a prisoner of war in Nazi Germany, now an American citizen, but an informed person on the matters that we intend to discuss this morning. The gentleman's name, I hope I can handle it, Vyacheslav Zabalishin. That's spelled V-Y-A-C-H-E-S-L-A-V. The last name is spelled Z-A-W-A-L-I-S-C-H-I-N. Would you pronounce that for me, sir?
Right. You're right.
I am right?
Right.
Great. I can go home now. We're also very fortunate to have Jim Runyon with us. Jim is a translator, and Jim is here to translate some of my work. I hope. Now, Ivan, I think first, to get this discussion on the road, could you give us first a little idea of what the article is about?
John, I will try to do so. Stefan Sanderson and I, in this magazine, which is basically a science fiction magazine, but has been running a number of serious-minded articles on peculiar subjects over a couple of years now, I think, Stefan, right?
Yeah.
We have tried to introduce some thoughts upon theoretical analysis, I hope logical analysis, of what this mysterious problem is of what is called UFOs, unidentified flying objects in the sky. Actually, I think that name, if I may say so, John, is rather ridiculous. I prefer to call them EMPS, which is extra mundane phenomena. In other words, that there may be things in our sky, or there are alleged to be things in our skies, and have been throughout the ages, which nobody quite knows what they are. We haven't caught one yet. They have not, in other words, as the United States Air Force says, been identified. Now, we have worked along from the beginning, a couple of years ago. We started off all kinds of crazy ideas of what these things could be. Everybody seems to think there's one kind of thing called a flying saucer, which is an expression which aggravates me very much, in the sky, which is not known. And if only we could get one, the whole problem would be solved. And we started off to try and theorize as to what different kinds of things might be in the sky. Well, to make a long story short, we have worked down through various subjects. Could they be themselves these objects, or some of these objects, living entities? We talked about that, John, on our program a couple of times. Then, could they be sort of what I call assorted junk, i.e. bits of old planets that have blown up, planets made of ice, planets made of glass, meteorites and bolides and rains of frogs and fish and all the rest of it. We did that part. Then we came to the next one. Could these things be machines constructed by intelligent entities or objects or living things on other planets going around other suns? Talked about that. And then there was left over a residue, John, of stuff. And there have been a great number of reports of objects in our sky since the end of the last war, which seem to be very material and to behave very nearly like what we call airplanes. They started off with a man called Kenneth Arnold in 1947, I think I'm right in saying, who was asked as a private flyer to go out and search for a downed plane somewhere round about Mount Rainier. Rainier. How do you pronounce that in America? I say
Rainier.
Mount Rainier. Good. And he said that he had seen in the sky at that time a number of disc-shaped or lenticular-shaped objects fluttering around, and he tried to describe their motions. And the newspaper people who picked him up, he was unable to describe their particular type of flight, and they asked him, well, how did they go through the air? And he said, well, it's just as if you'd taken a saucer and thrown it across a lake or a pond, and it had sort of skittered across the top, and they immediately coined this wonderful phrase, flying saucers. But when we had been over the other various possibilities of things seen in the sky, we ended off with a residue of objects which are reported by many tens of thousands of people, which seem to be material objects, behave like our own aeroplanes, but rather more so. And we then started to try and dig into the possibility that some of these things, some of them, mind you, not all, but some, could have been constructed on the surface of this Earth recently. In other words, that they are nothing else but a very advanced form of aeroform or plane. And we had various rather wacky ideas about it, but we put them all together and we started digging. And then all of a sudden I came across a man living in this country who told me, quite out of the blue, for no reason at all, that he had been, he was a German, he's now an American citizen, he lived in South America, and that he had worked at a certain aircraft factory outside of München in Germany, and that he was an engineer, and he had been working, or his job at the end of the war was working on certain kind of engines, and these were rocket engines. And that they were in a very secret part of the plant, and these rocket engines had been installed in a kind of circular plane, and that this plane, this type of plane, had flown. And I asked him, I had never met this gentleman before, and he didn't know I was interested in this subject at all, and it was nothing to do, if you understand, with UFOs or flying saucers. We were talking about something quite different, and it came up. And he said that he had worked on these types of planes, or whatever you like to call them. They were circular, and they had, I think, 8 engines going around the outside, and we'd have to get into the description of this later, because I will put a drawing on the table, and John is much better at describing things over the air than I am. And that these planes were not mock-ups, they had actually flown. And he told me further that at the end of the war, they were still making them when the war more or less ended. And to finish up this tale very quickly, just to set the pace here, he said that as the Allies were approaching from the west, we had a lot of tanks and such like, and it was a dry summer, if you remember, and the people in this particular plane plant in southern Germany, they knew, they were instructed by the German army, who simply went away, that the Allies were coming and that they were to stay in their houses and do nothing, because that is the end of a war. And they could see this dust column in the distance as the Allies were coming. And his story was that the German army dissolved or went away, and they were left there on their own. And in due course, the Allies arrived. But in the meantime, a column came from the other side, from the Russian end of the Allies. And they swooped down on this factory, as I get the facts, and if I'm wrong, Stefan will have to correct me, because he's got a better memory than me, and it's all right here documented. This column arrived from the Russian side with heavy transport empty and a number of technicians, and they went into this large plant, and they went straight to the particular part where these engines were being constructed and this alleged aerofoam was being built. And they swooped upon it, and they gathered up all the metallurgists, and they took all the mock-ups and the blueprints they could find. They did not follow with the engineers themselves who were actually doing the construction work. They wanted the metallurgists. They took everything else they could find, and they took each one of the engines that were completed and took parts out of them, and they left a large pile of the rocket tubes for these engines, and there's another story which we'll come to later, and then they went off to the Russian side. Now, that was the first thing we stumbled across. Now, what this article is about this evening is that there's a story, and we have heard these stories through magazines published in Italy, in Venezuela, in the Argentine, and they are stories. But we tried to put them all together, and then we started to get more stories about exactly what the Germans were doing or were not doing at the end of the war, what we found or what we did not find there. And Stefan and I began to discover that they conflict. A number of these reports are completely official. There is a report which John has before him, or will have before him in a moment. It's right here from the RAF magazine in England as to what a second go-around found out. Now, let me explain that. At the end of a war, there's a great deal of confusion, and the people rushing about everywhere doing everything and not doing everything. And we sent in our intelligence officers to find out what was going on in these underground factories that the Germans had. And they made certain reports. And then there was a kind of lull. And apparently somebody later on said, we better have a reappraisal of this. What was going on? What is left? And they sent out another crew, an international crew from the West. I do not know, it's not specified in the article what they were, but this article is in the official magazine of the RAF, the Royal Air Force. And it is telling what happened some months after the war had ended. They sent back another crew there to reappraise the thing. And what they say in that article, which I hope we will bring out later on this evening, is kind of alarming. They found a great deal of these things which are, at least they say now, but a great number of things which in the last 10 years have been rumored and pooh-poohed, and on some occasions actually denied officially, they now come out and state were there. Not only that there was the V1, or buzz bomb, and the V2, or rocket bomb, but there was the V, and they call them in Germany A, up to 10, and that there were up to 100 more on the drafting board. That's what they state in this article. Now, the whole point of this, I've got some gentlemen together here this evening, and we've been talking before, and I've learned some thick and a lot that I didn't even know when we put together the facts that we have in this article. Rocketry is a very ancient thing, John. The ancient Chinese knew how to fire off a rocket. Abraham Lincoln was greatly disturbed about rocketry. At his time, the British, as I pointed out, were using rockets of a kind, which Lester Del Rey will be able to explain further later. What do you call them? Dry powder rockets?
They were solid propellant or powder rockets.
But still, they were rockets, and the British used them in an attack on Pondicherry in India. All the way through history, there have been rockets. Now, one of our guests this evening has pointed out in some remarks, which Jim Runyon here will read to you later on, I hope, if we have the time, and then we can comment upon them. There was a great deal of rocket development going on in Russia between the wars, World War I and World War II. Now, what, John, is the answer to all of this? How much of these published articles, some of which appear to be official or semi-official, they're not reprimanded by officiality, if you follow me, are true and which are not true? Have I made my... what we're talking about tonight is, could there be some types of planes or aeroforms or things that can fly in the air today which were developed maybe only on the drafting board, maybe in prototype in Germany at the end of the last war, which had been further developed either by us or the Russians? I don't know of any other people in the world who have the capacity, industrial capacity to do it. Are there such things? And if so, when did they first start flying? And are we flying them over each other's territory?
Well, I think I'd like to ask you one question right now, Ivan. Is this a question, or do you have a definite answer to the question yourself?
John, we have no answer, and that's the thing that puzzles me. We have an awful lot of facts which are lying around here at this table. I think all the gentlemen here know about this. Each one has something to contribute. And I am desperately alarmed. I would like to know what of all this information here is true or could be true, and why can't we get a straight answer out of anybody? Now, I can give you a lot of facts, John, and I hope they will come out after all this.
Well, I hope so, too. We should be able to get a couple of facts out anyway.
John, this is not like a radio show. It's like sitting around and talking. We have been doing a lot of talking before we came up here, as you know we do, all of us, and I'm quite surprised at the number of other facts that come out. You can draw them out because around this table, I think there are other people who probably just are taking sort of on the matter and putting in what they know about this subject. Maybe we'll get some kind of answer as to whether allegedly UFOs could actually be aeroforms constructed on the surface of this Earth, and if so, by whom?
What do you think about this, Lester Del Rey?
Well, I think to begin with, we should straighten out this matter of V and A. There were 10 A's, and all of them are accounted for. There was A1, which is an experimental model, only about 3 feet high, which was never flown. Aggregata. Mechanism or test model or whatever you want to translate it. It doesn't translate exactly.
And the V?
V is, it translates as vengeance. Vergeltung, that's right. That was the propaganda term, V. A1 was an experimental model. A2 was an experimental model of about the same size which flew. A3 was the first one that they began to shape up with. That came out to about 25 feet in height. Yep. A4 was V2. But before they built A4, they built A5 as a test model. A6 was on the drafting board only. A7 was... wait a second. I've forgotten what A7 was. But A7, nevertheless, it was an A5 with wings. But it had, however, the same basic fuel system as they were going to use for the A9. The A8 was designed but never built, not even in mock-up. They did no work on it at all because they dropped it. A9 was a winged V2, which was using a different fuel that they were going to mount on the A10, which was intended solely as a first stage of an A9. So that the A9, A10 are one combination.
Well, this winged V2, I once saw a photograph of a V2 with wings. It was a mock-up, and it had space for a suicide pilot to guide it more effectively. Was that it?
No, that was one of the imaginary things. That was a drawing and not a photograph.
Oh, this is a photograph of a mock-up.
I can show you a number of photographs from drawings that look like real things. No, it might have been a mock-up. Somebody might have made a mock-up. But as far as that goes, we've got mock-ups all over in every studio of a rocket, as far as that goes. Not a working mock-up. Those, however, are the official designations, and those were used for the work done in the straight rocket and for subplots in Feynman.
Now, where did the buzz bomb fit into that?
The buzz bomb was produced in another part of Feynman by an entirely separate group. The buzz bomb was produced by the Air Force. All the A group, or the V2 family of weapons, the rockets, were produced by the Army, and they were completely separate.
At Peenemünde?
All at Peenemünde.
Right. Now, what went on, do you know anything about this? What went on down near München?
Well, they had a number of
The
factories.
magistrate.
These were the test and experimental sections at Peenemünde. And München, I don't know. Nordhausen and so on, they had this huge factory. Now, I'm not too clear on my German geography. I should be, but I'm not. They had factories where they built the parts. Nordhausen, for instance, built practically all of the parts for the V2. And that was a big thing we found. But don't look for any absence in those numbers. It's mysterious. And V7 is the designation that was never used. V3 was as far as they went in the propaganda thing. That was supposed to represent at one time the Schmetterling, I think it was. I've got a note on it. Yeah, that was supposed to be the Schmetterling, which was a ground-to-air missile. And incidentally, there's a Schmetterling and a Rhine Maiden and the V2 all have characteristics which mysteriously, when added together, fit into most of this story. If you sort of blur them all, you get a very fine description of many of these things you're talking about, as if somebody confused them all in his mind, as working the factory where parts of all were produced.
Well, now, did they, the A weapons, were there any circular aeroplanes?
Not except in the sense that all of the rockets naturally will look circular from the bottom when they were flying.
Yeah,
but no, they were not. They did not have a circular airform because they were carried on their tails, essentially.
I'm going to show you something in a moment.
Let me take care of a little business, and then we'll be back with our guest. We're talking about an article entitled Man-Made UFO. It was written by one of our guests this morning, Ivan T. Sanderson. Just before we took care of the commercials, I think, Ivan, that you wanted to get something out of your briefcase. Is that right?
Yeah, something I seldom do, John. I wanted to show to Lester.
WOR Radio, your station in New York, 710 on the dial.
By this engineer who worked in Germany, who told me this story, which seems to fit into the stories published in these other publications, of the development outside of Munich in southern Germany by a subsidiary of the Messerschmitt. Was that not right, Stefan? On behalf of the German Air Force, right? On this occasion?
Yeah.
Yes. Of a circular aeroplane having 6 engines. Look, I'm not an engineer. I'm a zoologist. I got into this thing by the back end. Perhaps you could ask somebody else to describe that drawing, if you could, later on, John. Or now,
do you want to describe that? Who do you think would be best case? Possibly Lester.
I think
Can you
Lester.
describe it
I
for
can
us,
make
please?
a rough attempt. It shows both a side view and a view from the bottom. The side view looks a great deal like a conventional drawing of a saucer, except that it seems to have small tubes sticking out, which apparently are blasting out some kind of a stream of matter, gas, or something like that to keep it going.
backwards, you mean?
Backwards, yeah. From the bottom, it is roughly circular with 6 arms projecting at a slight angle from it outward. At the end of each arm, it might be a small jet or it might be a rocket. About halfway from the end of the arm to a circular center is something which is vaguely sketched in and seems to be some type of airfoil.
A flange,
yes.
Said, yeah.
It looks a great deal like a pinwheel that you see at the 4th of July with 6 arms. And apparently is spinning rapidly enough to create some kind of a blur. That is about the best I can describe it. This is very interesting to me because it looks very much the way a Rheintochter or a Rhine Maiden rocket might have looked when seen from the ground. That was it was about 25 feet tall. It was a missile which they used to attack planes, or they hoped to, and I believe was made by Messerschmitt, incidentally.
Uh-huh.
It had, at the top, it had 4 little tiny steering vanes. It did not look at all like this from the side.
Okay.
It then had fixed guiding vanes sticking out from it. Actually, the rocket tube stuck out between the vanes rather than at the end of the vanes.
Uh-huh.
And then it was a peculiar thing. At the bottom of it, it had its powder charge rather than at the top. But if this didn't have the powder charge, it would look just about the way the Rhine Maiden would have looked.
Did you see the dimensions given on this?
No.
I'm simply reporting 156 feet in diameter.
Well, I remember a plane that we were working on at McDonald's, which was supposed to carry 1 man. I was working on the parts that somebody else was, and he reported it was a 20-man pursuit ship.
A 20-man pursuit ship?
That's what he reported it as. Why? You know why he reported it as that?
With 20 men in it.
There was a very simple reason. We were making far more experimental chairs than it seemed necessary for the plane. We were making them only because we were trying to find a chair the pilot could sit in comfortably. And we made about 20 of them up. So he reported it as a 20-man pursuit ship. These things do get slightly garbled.
Yeah. But the point is here, this fellow told me, he said, now these things were constructed in this manner. He explained that it was a lenticel.
Yeah.
They had tried all the rocket types. But there was nothing to do with the construction work being done in that area. He said, their project was nothing else but these lenticular forms. And that they had a revolving flange around the outside, and that these motors, jets, rockets, whatever they were mounted on that. In order to stabilize them, they had an additional jet above. Follow me. I suppose we'd have to come back to this saucer business and take 2 saucers, put one underneath and one on top.
Lens shape.
Yeah, lens shape, lenticular shape. I said before, but I don't know if I'm making myself clear. Anyhow, take 2 saucers, put them together, make a lens, and then running around it is a flange. And the certain number of motors are mounted on that, 6 in this particular drawing. Then there's one above the back end of the top dish, and another one on the bottom side of the bottom dish, pointing backwards, and that they acted as a counter to the revolvement of the flange, all right, in order to stabilize things, just like a helicopter has to have a little...
Yeah, the torque effect.
A little torque at the back, a little extra propeller to keep it from going around the other way. And that they got their initial push or lift from those 2 jets, or rockets. He says they're rocket engines, that lift, those 2, to shove it in the air. Then the flange started around, and just the same as if you throw a solid object, you can throw it so far, but if it's spinning, they should say it will go further. Is that right or wrong?
Yeah, I think it's right.
Wrong or right?
I think it's right.
I think it's right. Huh? Well, is it? I mean, I don't know. I'm a zoologist. I'm not an engineer.
It depends on the shape. If it's absolutely flat, it doesn't make any difference. But if it has a slight bowl, it probably will travel further if it's spinning.
Well, that's exactly precisely what this fellow told me. He said that once they got it in the air, then they turned on the other rocket, and it got a certain amount of would it be lift or forward propulsion? I do not know. According to the way it's tilted.
Well, it's sort of an acid-did helicopter, of all things, the way it's described, so it might get some lift from its motion, I should think.
Well, would it or would it not? I mean, I say over and over again, I'm not an engineer, I want to know.
You can build a toy that will work that way.
Well, if you can build a toy, perhaps you can go along and
perhaps you can.
A larger one. And that, he continues, that 2 of these actually flew. Now, here's something else. Is this in the article or not, Stefan? You have to bear me out on this. But one of them went somewhere, either into the Baltic.
Over the Baltic,
yes. Well, they were flown over the Baltic.
Yes.
There, I don't understand, because that sounds like Peenemünde, huh?
Mm-hmm.
And that one either went into the Baltic, and I do remember a news report just after the war of something having been seen going into
the first sighting of a V2. It was sighted in Sweden originally, and as a matter of fact, they protested it. They protested it that one of them got out of control, the V2, and it made quite an international stink for a while. You remember that?
Yes, but I think it was a little different. What happened was, in that time, during the last period of the war, that various mysterious things seemed to be going on over our air in Sweden. And for a long time, we didn't know what it was. And then the strange thing happened that one of these things landed. And there was great secrecy about it at the time. We didn't get to know much, and I don't think you're right that there was any protest being made, but something much more important happened.
Yeah.
The whole thing, of course, went into pieces when it got into the ground in a place in southern Sweden, but our military people very diligently collected all the bits that they could find, and they packed it all off to England.
You're right.
And the British were able to figure out what it was. And so, although perhaps it didn't help them much, they really were prepared for what was going to happen. They were able to figure out how this thing was functioning. And what had happened was simply that this was one projectile that was being tested from Peenemünde, and that had got out of its intended orbit. If orbit is the word for something that doesn't go into outer space. At that time, I think it was. Trajectory, if you like. And this is, if I'm not mistaken, it's even mentioned in Churchill's History of the War. Where he gives credit to Sweden for having helped them in this. This was a V2.
Yeah.
That is definitely established.
Yeah.
It was not a circular thing.
What was essentially,
Go ahead, Ben.
what was essentially the difference between a V1 and a V2? The so-called buzz bomb and the V2.
Do you know the differences?
I think that I know. One was a jet-propelled thing, and the other thing was a rocket.
So the first rocket engine actually started with a V2.
No, V1 you could shoot down, or you could get out right away of.
That's right.
Look, I got one on my
V2,
head.
if you heard it, then you were safe. Because if it had hit you, you would never have known it. It was so much faster.
Somebody will be calling up in a moment and tell us something's wrong with the transmitter. I'm Stephen Sanderson.
Yes, what is interesting at this point, though, is that a number of ufologists, including, of all people, Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst, talk repeatedly about these things first appearing over Sweden. In his book, which was published earlier this year by Russia Verlag in Zurich, Ein moderner Mythos, Jung says that they began in Sweden. They were first seen, rather, in Sweden, in the form of a sort of projectile. I'm translating while I read this from the Swedish review of the book. In the form of a certain projectile, a type of projectile which was observed during the war's last period, and which was at that time assumed to come from Russia. This appeared in Mr. Åhman's own newspaper, by the way, Dagens Nyheter, in Stockholm.
So he looks very surprised.
Well, I'm not responsible for everything that's printed in that paper, and I don't know exactly what this reference is to. Apparently, it is not to the V2 that Mr. Del Rey spoke about, but it is, if I remember right, true that not during the last period of the war, but after, shortly after, there were observations of some kind of objects that were seen over the Baltic. I cannot say for sure if they were seen actually over Sweden, that were believed to have come from Russian test stations situated in the Baltic, probably somewhere in the what we call the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. It may also be, though, that what Jung is referring to are V2s that did not fall down, which happened only with one, but there were many, or at least several, that from our later knowledge we can say traveled over the Swedish territory.
Ivan?
Yes. May I clear up one point that Ben made, and Ivkivit made a moment ago? To get that out of the way, first of all, the difference between the V1 and the V2, and then we'll come back to this. If you were on the receiving end, it was very obvious. The V-1 was a robot plane.
No, you heard them coming.
Well, it was a robot plane. It was a little airplane with wings, with a warhead on it. And it had a pulse jet on top of it, which had vanes in front. That's very important. And you could hear it coming, and it buzzed along. It was a buzz bomb, and the awful bee noise I was making before was just that. If I may digress and be a little bit, getting a little heavy and be a little light, I'd like to tell you a story about the B-1, if I may, John. A very good friend of mine was a member of the BBC, which is the broadcasting corporation of, over there. And the BBC building is at the top of the end of Portland Place in London, and they had fire watchers and bomb watchers and everybody else on the roof. And this is a gentleman, a remarkable fellow. He was over here as representative of the BBC for the exchange of information on electromagnetic developments and so on and so on. And a man with a great sense of humor. And he was watching one night for bombs and fires and so on, and all the things we did during the war. And there's a parapet on the top of this roof. It's one of the only flat roofs in London. And he was watching there, and all of a sudden one of these buzz bombs came. And it was just before dark, and you could see a sort of flame coming out of the back of them. And before he heard the noise, he saw this thing coming. And to his horror, it was losing altitude and cutting out as they did. And then when they finally cut out, you waited, and then there was this awful smack and a lot of falling bricks later on. Well, this thing was advancing towards him, and it came lower and lower and kept on cutting out, and to his horror, it came right straight for the building, and he ducked, and it passed over the top of the building at about 40 feet, they estimated, at which time they were actually shaking all over. And it went up the street to Regent's Park, which is the other end, which is a large park, like our Central Park. And they all turned around and looked. It had missed them. And it suddenly took a neat turn to the right and described a large circle and went all over the east end of London and away back to exactly where it come from before. But don't forget, these things lost altitude all the time, because every time they cut out, they lost a little. And he came straight back again, having made a beautiful circle, right over the BBC. This time they said, well, this is it. I mean, we've done our stuff and the war and heroics and all the rest of it. So they all lay flat on the roof and said, well, goodbye, it's all over. And this time it passed with about 2 foot to spare over the top of the parapet and went up into Regent's Park. And this time it turned left and went sailing off and described a very large circle. And the next thing they saw, it was heading right back for the third time. And then all of a sudden it cut out and it plunged to the bottom of Regent Street. And one of the most terrifying experiences, I suppose, that any man can have. You don't mind being shot at. But I think Lester is itching here to say something. They had a direction-finding device in them, didn't they? They found their own way. What is that?
They had kind of an idiot device. I've forgotten what it was called, but it did behave just about as idiotically as that sometimes.
It was supposed to go to a point and then sort of blow up and sort of do something.
It was shoddily cheaply put together.
Very shoddy job, yes, and cheap German goods made it. And it got there, and apparently something went wrong with it, stabilized, and it described the circle one way and then the other. Complete figure 8 right over the top of this four-edged fellow's head. However, to finish this off, the V2 was an entirely different business. That was a rocket. And you did not see it coming because I think, if I'm right in saying, the ledge could travel at 3,000 miles an hour on the way down?
It reached a speed of about 3,600 miles an hour estimated.
36. Well, I was walking up this same street, funny enough, that I was talking about, Portland Place in London. It's a big wide street in broad daylight at the end of the war. And all of a sudden there was a noise. I mean, during the war in the bombardment, you got so fed up with it, you just gave up. But this was really a monumental bang. I mean, with the Chinese New Year, you would have absolutely won if you'd had one of those. And he went off right in front of my face, over Regent's Park. It was just a blue flash, and you don't have time, you know. When you're out shooting at people, you expect these things, but when you're just walking along a nice sunny day, and it was a beautiful sunny day, whammo. And then all of a sudden, all over, and there were great splashes of wet on the sidewalk.
Peroxide?
No. I understand that as these things came down they'd gone up so high, they iced up to a depth of about a thickness of 2 feet of ice. This is what I was told. I do not know, and you have to correct me. And when they plunged down into the lower atmosphere, the ice contracts, doesn't it, when it gets hotter? And it squeezed the bombs and detonated them. So instead of hitting the ground and blowing up and making a great big crater and smashing everything, they blew up about 400 or 500 feet in the air. And then when they blew up, there was still an ice cake around them, and this ice was thrown all over the lot. Well, all I know was that every piece missed me. About 6 houses on my left just tottered a little bit, and we all looked at each other, and then they just crumbled and sort of sat down. They didn't, they were old houses, they were just bricks piled up. And I seemed to have been in between the blasts, and nothing happened to me, but there were these ice patches all around. Great, huge splashes, just like if you sat on the ground, bang like that, and there's sort of V going out from you. And all down the sidewalk and on the pavement and everything with this. And I was completely confused, completely shattered, of course, actually, for several hours. And I talked to a friend of mine in the RAF, and he said, oh, yes, when they come down, they ice up, and due to the ice compression, instead of exploding when they land, by contact, they detonate in the air, and then the remainder of the ice is thrown around. So you never knew when these things were coming. And we had a great joke in London. You'd be sitting having lunch, and all of a sudden, everything would shake like that. Somebody else blew up a gasometer,
I've never heard of that.
And
I heard of an explosion in their main fuel pump where the peroxide just blew up all over, and of course immediately became hot water. But that would be hot, and you'd know it if it hit you.
If it hit you, yeah. Well, thank goodness every piece missed me, but I don't know what it was. But anyhow, to stress my point, V2 is an entirely different job. It was the first practical war rocket, and it just came down out of the blue at 3600, and you
I beg your pardon.
know what was...
It slowed down. It was only going 1,800 miles an hour when it landed.
That's awful fast, yes.
Hans, let me ask you this question.
Yes, sir.
How long have you been interested in this theory of Ivan Sanderson?
Oh, I would say almost from the beginning of our discussion of
He was originally interested in it. I understand, I may be wrong and correct me if I am, I understand that some attempts were made to have this German engineer join us this morning. Is that true?
Yes.
What is the reason that the German engineer did not join us?
I'm sure I think Ivan would be more qualified than I to answer
Ivan?
that.
Is there any particular reason?
No, I don't think there's anything mysterious about it at all. He has a good job, and he gets vacation once a year. And I'd asked him if he could be with us, and he said that he would like to be very much, but he did not know what he would be doing vacation or not. He did get it. I must admit I was a little late, perhaps, in asking him. He said he was very sorry, but he had made his wife and he had made plans for his vacation. There's nothing mysterious about it, John, at all.
Three men in black boots didn't visit.
No. None of that stuff. And I'll tell you something else. I'd like to say this on his behalf. I've known him for a couple of years now. That he told me he was kind enough not only to give me the information in the first place, but I have in front of me here 6 pages written by him of correction of the draft of the article that I wrote, all of which his corrections are incorporated in the article as published. And I asked him, do you mind this being published? And he said no. He said, when I had the honor of becoming an American citizen, I reported all this to the appropriate authorities. They know all about it. And
he did report it.
Oh, yes. He reported it all. Did
they seem interested in it?
He said they were interested in what he had to say, like everybody else. So there's nothing mysterious about him not being here. I wish he could have been here, because he might have been able to add something, but not much, because he has been very straightforward with me. He told me this story. He came to my house through an entirely different business altogether, which is my own animal business. I never met him. I didn't even know the lady.
His wife wanted to get rid of a bird.
She wanted to get rid of a bird. And she took a lot of trouble. She got in touch with me over the phone finally, and I invited her to come in, and she brought in the bird, which she was desperately fond of, but she'd had a baby, and the bird attacked this baby's eyes, and it peeped all the time, and she'd given it away 3 times, and the people felt the bird wasn't happy, and so I gave it back to her. And she thought we were kind to our animals, and she asked me if I'd like to have the bird. I said I would like to have very much. She brought it in, and she happened to bring a little baby with her and her husband. And we sat around talking, and I was coming up, as a matter of fact, to Long John's program that night to sit in on one of the very early discussions of, this is almost 2 years ago, John.
This was out in Carteret, New Jersey, I think.
That's right, on Flying Saucers.
Yes.
And she said, oh, you're going to be on the radio. Are you going to be talking about animals? And I said, as a matter of fact, no. You're going to be talking about flying saucers. And then I regretted that statement. Oh, she said, flying saucers. And I said, look, please, don't think that I believe in all this stuff, but I'm very, very interested and have been for many years. And I do think that there are some things in the sky which have not yet been identified. And then the husband, this engineer in question, pops in and said, I know there are because I worked on one of them. And he said, I know that thing was in the sky. And he said, if it was in the sky at the end of the war, and then he explained himself in Germany, he said, I don't see why it shouldn't be in the sky now. Because after all, the prototype of this and one flying machine, the engines, etc., went, certainly, he said, I know that some of these were taken to the Russian side, and he said, I think that some others were brought to this side. And he said,
The plans or the craft?
The craft, according to him, went the other way.
What's the other way?
To Russia.
To Russia. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or to that side. And a certain number of plans and some of the engineers came to this side. He pointed out, and this is a point that I want to make, John, that if technology had got to that point, if it had, that's what I want to know. I mean, the man may be making this all up.
The engineer?
The engineer, yes. But what he says coincides with what we now find in various other magazines. I mean, there's RAF magazine, there's one from Yugoslavia here, there's another one, quote, by an ex-Wehrmacht officer who has written it in Spanish, and all the rest which we can give you the details of because I have no memory, but they're all listed here on paper, and we can give them to you if you want them, and I think sooner or later. He may be telling a great story, but what he told at that time, that's 2 years ago, I was very interested. I didn't do anything further except put it on paper. And then when we began to find these other statements which coincide with them, we put the whole thing together, and then we sent him back to this engineer, my draft, as I said before. And he sent me these 6 pages book I have here saying your memory is mistaken, and he had certain things correct. And what he said was this, that technology had increased to that point in Germany before the end of the war, and that the results of their researches and their mock-ups, and he stresses in this article that they were not just factory models, which I was an engineer, I don't know all these terms, working models, but they were not working models, they were actual prototype planes. They flew, 2 of them, and he said that Hitler inspected one of them and very nearly flew in one of them. That's his story. I don't know. But
how does he know all this?
Because he worked in that factory, he said.
Was this a rumor on the part of Hitler, or did he see Hitler at the factory examining this craft?
He was present as a junior engineer at this factory when the big man himself turned up to inspect it. No, it's not Nordhausen.
In Munich.
Outside in Munich.
Hitler inspected the prototypes. The first is...
Was this the Messerschmitt factory?
It's one of the Messerschmitt.
Because right outside Munich, right in the mountains there are tunnels.
That is the place.
Let Hans read this.
The engineer's own words are, Hitler inspected the prototypes. The first 2 official test flights, not the first planned test, were made in his presence.
And that was outside in Munich. And it was a Messerschmitt subsidiary.
Yeah, well, there definitely are bored into the mountains.
Into the mountains.
There are tunnels that were underground. Well, they weren't really underground. They were inside the mountains. There were tunnels that were Messerschmitt factories.
That's right. That's the old.
Those are the Harz Mountains, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. Right between Munich and Garmisch.
That's right. Oh, that's the place that he has in his notes here, which we did not.
Is it this engineer's belief that this strange appearing craft, this saucer-shaped craft, is flying over the States?
No, he didn't go that far. He's far too pragmatic for that. He simply said, I worked on such a craft in Germany, and I saw it fly. And at the end of the war, both Allies arrived simultaneously. And the only remaining machine, one having crashed in the Baltic or just gone out into space, was taken away behind the Iron Curtain, as we call it, plus the metallurgists who worked on the rocket tubes. And they took all the blueprints they could lay their hands on. By agreement, it's all perfectly legal and everything, and they went away. They did not even bother to take the engineers. And they left a large number of these rocket tubes. And here is the point, John, that the tubes themselves are still allegedly lying around there, because when our allies from this side, that is the Western allies, arrived, hours or days, a few days later, I think I'm right in saying, according to his statement, they were interested in anything that flew. And they went around and they couldn't find anything that flew. And a lot of the engineers pointed out to them, well, there's these rocket tubes to make something fly. They said, we are not interested. Now, they turned around, according to his statement, and they said to the Messerschmitt factory there, to the German management, the civilian management, get back into production, get the economy going again. But don't make anything of a military nature, and don't make anything that flies. Make trucks, make anything you like. And he tells me, this is his story, which is published in there, that the German management went to work, try and get things going, but they did not have any steel, John. They were short of steel. Therefore, they cannibalized anything that they could find in their junk piles or anywhere else. And they started melting down everything. And when they came to these rocket tubes, they were unable to melt the darn things. They tried the very best furnaces that they had, and they had a great deal of trouble. Finally, they did get sufficient heat or whatever it was, and they melted down some of them, I think he says in the article here, to make them into blocks for truck engines. But there were still, when he left, piles of these things lying around, and we, and I say we, the Allies on this side, were totally disinterested. They said, well, it's just a lot of big tubes, and left it at that. I see Lester shaking his head and looking really distressed about this.
You don't agree,
Lester? This was the thing that threw me worst on this testimony of anything.
Right, well, you pull it apart. I'm simply a reporter. I'm a zoologist.
This man is an engineer, but he obviously is not a machinist.
No, he wasn't.
A machinist who could take... We'll assume that they had a metal which is very difficult to melt for them. There are metals such as some alloys, and certainly tungsten wouldn't be melted easily. There are a number of metals which would be very difficult to melt.
These were not pure metals.
They were, all right, some kind of an alloy with a very high melting point. Fine. We'll even go that far. But when they will take those unknown metals and start machining them as rare and precious as machining tools were then, not knowing exactly what they are, those men are not machinists, they are geniuses.
They didn't know.
He said, it's quoted, machine this unknown new material into engine blocks.
No, what he told me, which is in here, is that they finally managed to melt them down.
Will you read it?
They've managed to melt them down, and from that they got a certain amount of beryllium steel, I think I'm right in saying. Don't you have a steel with beryllium alloy?
Yeah.
Right, they got a certain amount of that, which they then tooled and used to make cheap engine blocks.
Is there anything in the article about that?
Yes. See, were they able to master them and to reshape this mysterious metal into blocks for gasoline engines so badly needed at that time? Well, reshaping unknown metal into blocks is a pretty tricky business. It's sometimes tricky even with known metals.
Well, that's bad writing on my part, because he did not exactly say that. I will, during the coffee break, search through his 6 pages here and finish down.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that.
They finally melted them down.
Yeah.
And they got some steel out of it, and the steel they used to make cheap engine blocks. Am I not right, Stefan?
Stefan?
No, I think that is his word. Well, those are his own words.
What Lester just read?
Yeah.
Oh, they are. Well, I don't know.
I
look through
I
it.
don't like that kind of sloppy reporting because I can't conceive that any practical engineer would risk his very valuable machine tools trying to machine for engine blocks, which are usually, incidentally, plain cast iron. They don't need steel for that. He would risk his tools on anything that refractory and difficult to operate and unknown, because they might just chop his tools all to bits, and besides which he wouldn't be able to allow for tempering, he wouldn't be able to allow for expansion and contraction. He wouldn't know how to put them together. It would be very dangerous and difficult stuff.
That I can follow what you're saying. I don't know. Now, this is another question I want to ask.
I think he's probably an honest man, but I think that he has gotten a lot of the scuttlebutt mixed up with things that were happening that he actually was working on.
WOR Radio, 710 dial in New York.
Right after according to the reparations agreement, the Russians were entitled to certain factories. When they did come into parts of Germany and took factories lock, stock, and barrel and shipped them right back to the Soviet Union, they even ripped up stretches of railroad track. I mean, they took anything they could lay their hands on, but it was sort of a lock, stock, and barrel operation. The way you describe it, they walked in and they took parts out, that they were looking for certain things. And also the fact that they actually took metallurgists back and they were not interested in the engineers. The Russian policy with German scientists were completely different from what the United States was. The United States would actually take the scientists, if they were interested in them, back to the States and have them work here, such as the well-known Werner von Braun, who was taken into I think Mexico for a few weeks and finally set up the nucleus of what later became the Redstone Arsenal. But the Russians did not use the scientists in any sort of working capacity. They would take them back to Russia and literally brainwash them, get everything they knew. They would, in fact, I think, remember one German scientist saying he spent something like 3 months doing nothing but writing out on paper what he had known.
We did the same at times. Well, not brainwashing, we asked them.
Well, I mean, then just picking their brains, and then when everything was over, they were sent back to Germany. They were never used in a factory.
Oh, no, a lot of them worked in the factories. A lot of them did.
No, except a few top leading stars, such as the man who was Werner von Braun's superior in Germany, is now working for Russia.
Dornberger?
No, I think that's the name.
Isn't correct.
That is not correct.
No.
Or what is correct?
They took a number of people back there and had a lot of them work, and some of them, as a matter of fact, it has been indicated, were doing fairly high-level work at one time. They grabbed up quite a number of them, along with factories. They very frequently took the men who operated the factories, and they took them back and put them to work. You can call it slave labor, you can call it voluntary, it probably was both.
Say once again, this is a tough thing to do, but I've got to interrupt and see if I can make a few bucks. Back with Ivan, or rather Hans Steffen Sanderson. You mentioned before that you wanted to read something from an RAF publication. Is that right?
Well, Ivan has the RAF magazine. I have a Swedish translation here of an article by Vladimir Shapinsky, which I believe appeared in Look. Isn't that right, Mr. Oman? That you think I think it appeared in, I was told that it had appeared in an American magazine and that it was in Look. Anyway, this article describes the experiences of these Russian police officers as they came to Nordhausen, 6 kilometers. This Vladimir Shapinsky, who is a Russian officer during the war, who is now an American citizen, says that they spent the first night in Nordhausen. The next morning they went 6 kilometers north to a village which had the rather curious name of Dora, D-O-R-A, which may have been, I don't know, it's possible that it was this. There was a cement factory there. Then near that cement factory they found tunnels in the mountains, which were the storehouse for these materials that are described in the article. When they came out of this storehouse, his chauffeur, he says, turned to him and said, This is fantastic. Here the Germans had their most secret weapons, and the Americans leave them for us. It is really nothing evil in these Americans, but they are really a little naive.
That's quote from that article?
Then the article goes on. It's a little too long to perhaps describe at this point. It goes on to describe how they systematically looted the factory, how they sent everything they could possibly lay their hands on. This is by the way, confirmed by the RAF article in the RAF magazine. They sent everything they could possibly lay their hands on, human or otherwise, in sealed railway cars to Russia. Let me say one thing, by the way, and I think John will forgive me for saying so. Because I knew if you are a little confused at what all this has to do with science fiction, we have been running a series of articles on this entire subject of ufology, just as we have similarly been running a series of articles by Lester Del Rey on the subject of satellites and Sputniks, which, like ufology, are subjects of concern and interest to the man in the street, to the intelligent layman who reads magazines such as ours. Unfortunately, I don't think we can entirely close our eyes to the possibility that if the UFOs are not extraterrestrial in origin, as some of our friends say they are, then we have to face the possibility that they may come from somewhere on Earth. Where do they come from?
Well, that's the more paramount.
It's the more paramount and it's more uncomfortable. They feel more uncomfortable.
Well, both
alternative.
ideas are equally
It's perhaps a little more pleasant and more satisfying, and it appeals to our romantic imagination to say that they come from Mars, from Venus, and complete with beautiful, glamorous, suited gals and the like. But if this is not so, then the question is, from where on earth do they come? Do they come? Are they locally made artifacts, shall we say, or do they come from elsewhere?
Yeah, that's fairly obvious. They come from hunger.
That's quite possible. That's quite
They
possible.
suddenly pop up.
And they behave in a very peculiar fashion.
They certainly do, and I'm just puzzled about this whole business from a purely pragmatic and basic point of view. Here I have a newspaper man on my right. I happen to carry a newspaper club. We want to know what these things are. You get a lot of serious-minded citizens say they see things in the sky. All right, well, let's cut out all this Venus and Mars stuff and come down to what the ones which appear to be practical are. Everybody shilly-shares and sits around and says, oh, it's hallucinations and bad liquor and all the other amiable excuses, but there are too many serious-minded flyers. If that wonderful gentleman, Mr. Howell, had not been killed in that plane, he would have been on this program one night. He was one of the most profound skeptics. In fact, he was a professional skeptic until he, in his commercial plane, paid for, look after 40 citizens that were sitting behind him, ran into something which he almost ran into, which really alarmed him. And you should have heard him talk. He's not the only professional pilot I've heard talk.
Yeah.
All right, it's all imagination. If it isn't, what is it? Now, or what are they? I believe that they are extraordinarily varied. There's all kinds of junk floating around, as I said before, but some of them could be developed on this Earth recently.
Well, you get people
Starting about World War II.
You get people in Brazil like Simoes, an aviation official, and others, romantics. These are not easily.
But what about the ex-Wehrmacht officer who published a book in South America?
Yes.
The details of that in that article again. We can't read long extracts from anything, but...
Well, did he come out flatly and say that the German army had these things and had been flown?
Confirmed the same thing the engineer said.
And it was an A7.
And he
No, wait a minute.
all mixed up on basic facts.
All mixed up.
All mixed up.
But
All
everybody's
kinds of
mixed
basic
up,
facts.
including you, Mr. Bester Del Rey. Now, will you go back to your list of A's?
Yeah.
All right. Now, you go run down your A's again.
All right. It's going to it's some time, though.
No, very quickly. A1.
All right. A1, 2, and 3 were experimental ones developed toward the building of the A4 to find out what they could do. A4 was built, but before they built it, they built A5 as a test model for the A4.
Very good. Now, you stop on the A4. I'm quoting now from the RAF magazine, and I have to quote, I'm awful sorry, I'm very bad at reading on the air. They were sent over here, this British group. It was an operation of top speed and utmost secrecy. We left by air from the aerodrome which throughout the war had been used for air ferrying of secret agents to and from the continent. And we're soon back in Nordhausen. Here we go back to Nordhausen. The date was June the 12th, and we had just 3 weeks before the Russians were due to take over. Now, this is very muddling, because they'd been there already, and they were going back again. A group of SS rocket troops were assembled for our use, and these were given the task of selecting sufficient A4 material to make up 100 complete rockets. Sure. There were few complete rockets left at the plant, because the Americans had had the first pick. Did you not say that the A4 had never flown?
I did not. The A4 was the V2.
The A4 was the V2. I thought the A and the V were two separate lines.
No. V was the propaganda term. The vengeance model. That was a propaganda term, and it had nothing to do with where it came from. The A, or the A series, the Ivkivit series, were the ones done by the von Braun group. A1 to 10 were the ones they built, the ones they planned, and everything else. In other words, their code numbers for the different designs.
Oh, I see. Now, wait a minute. Von Braun was working in Peenemünde, huh?
Von Braun was the head of the rocket division in Peenemünde. That is the actual working head.
Yeah. And
so were the V1 groups in Peenemünde. They were the Air Force, however, whereas von Braun was with the Army. And there was as much competition and division among forces there as there is today here.
Yeah. In other words, there were at least 2, if not 3, separate German rocket developments.
Yes. There were 4 separate projects going on in Peenemünde. East, north, west, and south, to make it easy to remember.
Yes.
Now, this Nordhausen,
That's completely separate, but that's the factory where a lot of the parts were made.
well, the problem is that's where my engineer said he worked.
Yes, but they made the things for all kinds of things there.
Yes, he said so.
Yeah.
And he said that one of the developments was a circular-type plane.
Yes.
Now, Stefan, somewhere around in all this massive literature that we had to bring with us, we never like to do to a radio program, there is a list of which 3 were circular aeroforms. Can you remember which that was? Well, we'll come to that. Let's go on with other...
Well, there was actually a Messerschmitt, a conventional aircraft, a Messerschmitt that had a fan-like wing shape that very much resembled. It wasn't a pure circular plane.
but that was a plane, which was...
But at least the prototype of that kind of thinking was there.
Well, we had one, too, the pancake plane.
Yeah, pancake, but that was simply a plane pushed forward, but instead of having wings...
It had a spectacular performance, though, which was...
but I mean, it was great. It didn't have a circulating flange around it.
No, neither did the Messerschmitt.
There's an interesting paragraph in Vladimir Shabinsky's article, which I'd like to read at this point. Perhaps it will help to contribute to confusion. While we wandered around in the cavern, I'm translating, by the way, very freely from the Swedish while I'm talking. While we wandered around, the Russian police troops came there to evacuate secret weapons belonging to their department, and they weren't particularly happy to see the regular army people there, you see, there inspecting. Luckily, I was permitted to remain in Dora in order to take care of the transportation of 30 bulldozers, and in this way I had an opportunity to see how the V2 factory was transported back to Russia. Every machine part, every reserve, every spare part, every piece of raw material, every rocket, complete, whether complete or partially completed, was carefully packed down in crates which were marked USSR to NKVD, security police, in the Volga-Don district. Many of these workers in this factory and the engineers who remain in the Nordhausen area, they were now sent, together with the factory, to Russia. A police major by the name of Yegorov, who was in charge of this evacuation, told that the Americans had left behind a nearly complete collection of blueprints for the V weapons, and in addition to this, some drawings, or again blueprints rather, of the larger rockets, among them the intercontinental A9-A10.
Yeah. They probably did leave blueprints. On the other hand, we had already pulled out 300 tons of V2 parts.
Which was sold over here at $1 a page.
No, parts, not blueprints, parts. We took 300 tons of actual parts, and so we got the cream of the crop of those. The Russians didn't quite make it on the V2. We got a little bit better than they did.
But
on parts.
Now, Lester, you really don't know what you're talking about on this, and I would like to...
Well, all I have is one Brown's word on this, and he was there at the time. He was sitting around, as a matter of fact, cooling his heels while we interviewed him.
Have you read this RAF article?
I don't care about the RAF article. I'd rather take it from direct sources rather than forthright.
I wouldn't, I'm sorry, because I do not understand this chronology at all. I wish to goodness we had the time, while we're talking, somebody to write down a date, 12 months in a year from 6 months before the war ended till about a year after it ended, and then see exactly what these people are talking about. Now, these people in the RAF article, they were sent back, in other words, apparently, right at the collapse.
They were the British. The British were having a tough time getting any parts at all.
No, this was a combined operation.
I know, but the British nevertheless were looking for it at the time.
Sure they were, yeah.
It was a combined operation with everybody pulling for himself, as is usual in those cases.
Yes, close. But at the collapse, there's 2 whole subjects here that I want to get to the bottom of. And I don't know anything about it, frankly, except what I've been told. I put it together, and I want to find out. At the collapse, first of all, what actually happened. And secondly, there was a pausa, as the Dutch say, after that. And then everybody got together and said, good heavens, what's happened? Who's taking what? And then they got together, according to this article and that article, and I've heard it before, and you have. And they went back and reappraised this whole thing, to see if, and there was sort of combing operation went on. Now, in this article, it says that von Braun had been contacted in the first part and sort of ignored. You know, I mean, sort of fellow rocket expert and nobody's interested. Then they went back again, and the first time he said, all right, if you really want to talk sense, you chaps, I'll talk to you this time. Again, when we have the coffee break, I will try to get to mark these paragraphs and paraphrase them for you, John, because I think it's very important to find out exactly why there was that pause between the actual collapse, getting together and sort of saying, well, I mean, von Braun is a very important man, and let him talk. And he says in this article, in quotes, the other idiots who came here, they didn't even ask me any sensible questions, so I just kept my mouth shut.
You know the Army system, Ivan. The first thing that happened was that the Army went in there, and then the Army sent in their engineers, and they regarded as first-class scientists, of course. In the meantime, the people who were interested in rocketry and other scientists were sitting around saying, let us in, we want to talk to these guys. And they said, don't bother us now, we've got a country to occupy. And so, in the meantime, the engineers who were saying, what's the use of picking up a man when we can pick up the parts?
Yes, that makes sense.
And so there was just one bunch of confusion until the right men could get in there behind the Army, and that always takes a long time.
In the meantime, the Russians are very well organized.
The Russians were organized.
Now, we have the gentleman on our left who hasn't said anything yet, and I don't know if we can organize this. John, have you got some business to attend to first?
I think we should take a moment to talk about Hudson vitamins.
I would much rather take your straight idea of the straight thing. Why cannot we accept Russian flyers over here? I'd rather talk about that direct without this contradictory supporting evidence.
In what?
Why not?
First of all, you said
why not in a well-developed Russian plane and leave the flying saucers out of it completely? Leave all the mysticism about the marvelous inventions that the Germans had at the end of the war, which is why they won the war, and a few things like that out of it completely.
Very point that I want to make is, I'm interested, and I only got into this thing from the other end, starting way back in history to find out why people say there were things in the sky that didn't explain. What are they? All right, then we worked off all the other things, and then all of a sudden, we end up with the idea that some could be made on this earth. Why does everybody continue to say that they're lenticular in shape? That's the point that gets me. All right,
why are coats always white? Are they all colorblind?
Not all.
Most of them. They aren't. All the flying saucers aren't lenticular either.
No, you don't know very much about flying saucer business, I can see.
They're not all lenticular.
Sure. What?
Oh, cool. They're dressed in black. Well, I'm not. Wait a minute. I haven't met too many of them recently.
Let's leave the contractors out of it. Let's come to a couple of films that I've seen. Actually, both of them alleged. I mean, I don't know whether they could have been faked, sure, but I want to know. They were blue with a little sort of aura of red around them.
These are the flying saucers, not the ghosts.
No, keep on the ball for a moment. Things in the sky, unexplained. During the war, I saw so many that we were told to stop reporting them. We didn't know what the diggings they were over Domino's and Church down in the Caribbean. Those were all bright sort of peacock green, but they're bow-eyed, I don't know what. They're pretty strange-looking objects, and the films of these things that I've seen have never been white. I have been told by persons...
Now, wait, I didn't say that all flying saucers were white. I said that all ghosts were white, all flying saucers...
Ben, do you want to read some of those telegrams?
Telegram a little garbled, I think. It's addressed to Juan Joe.
That's possible.
Congratulations.
Big Joe's Happiness Exchange. Go ahead.
Congratulations, Ivan, on following up this story, but congratulations to Sylvester on not buying it. Rocket-powered helicopter, my foot. Ask any plane designer what he thinks of that combination. It's signed Lex Mebbin.
I would like to argue on that. It happens that one of our most successful one-man helicopters had an acid jet at the end of each vane, and it worked. And I was working at a place where it was built, and it was working beautifully. It didn't work very long, but it worked.
This is in New York City. Long John to Sanderson. Heard of Canadian attempting to develop jet-propelled saucers. Any success or new information? Signed Theodore Greenstone.
Of course, it's kind.
That one has been going on and on, yes.
This is from Brooklyn, New York. Long John. Mr. Sanderson, in view of your statement regarding rocketry in Germany, isn't it a fact that the Russians developed rocket artillery which reduced von Paulus's army before Stalingrad in 1942? while the Germans at Panmunda were trying to get the first V-2 rockets off the ground, in which they were unsuccessful until 1944. Signed Samuel Bunkin.
Look, Lester should take that one up. Would you mind?
In 1934, A2 flew 6,500 feet. In 1933 through 38, they were working on A3 with a maximum range of 8 miles. And in 1942, they were already flying Z2. That is the simple chronology of that. The Germans had gotten the very satisfactory A2 to work part of the time.
But had the gentleman who sent that last telegram, referring to two quite separate matters, as you know. The A weapons.
He said until 1944, the first V-2 rockets.
Yeah, but he tried to imply that the Russians had rockets.
The Russians certainly had rockets. They were entirely different types of rockets.
That's what I mean.
We also had rockets. Actually, our bazooka, for instance, was before the one in Stalingrad.
We had rockets in the Civil War.
We had, look,
the Greeks
rockets,
had rockets.
red glare, while appropriate today, nevertheless originally referred to the War of 1812 when they were being used.
Exactly, and precisely. In other words, this gentleman here is trying to imply that the Germans were behind the Russians. The Russians had one kind of rocket.
That's right, that the Russians actually had tactical rocket weapons.
They did. Certainly they did.
As a matter of fact, John, the Russians themselves state that in 1933, the first Soviet rocket driven by liquid fuel was launched.
Quite possible. In 1931, the first German one was launched, and in 1926 or thereabouts, Goddard flew our first rocket fuel. Liquid fuel.
Here on what happened, what actually did happen in Russia. Are you ready, Jim, to take a second part?
Jim Runyon?
Or would you tell us?
Yes. I understand. Bonjour. This is WOR Radio, your station in New York, 710 on the dial. My translator, Jim, help me.
All right, Jim. Do you want to turn that mic around just so that it'll be safe? No, let him use this one because you stay on your own mic, Ivan, please. Jim Runyon, would you mind coming in just a little closer, please? Thank you. And try to, I know that you have a statement there. Do you want to read that and try to stay on mic?
All right. Fine. This is the second person that Mr. Zavalisian would like to describe. That is, rather, the experience that he had when he met him. It was a lieutenant of the Smersha. That means death to the spies at the special section of the NKVD. And he spoke of a group of Soviet and German engineers who in South Russia are working on a boomerang rocket. This rocket is actually to return to the very spot from which it is launched. But unlike the engineer from Degendorf, it was difficult to believe this, MVD lieutenant. This conversation took place in 1951. But in 1955, in the Soviet journal Around the World, a science fiction story appeared written by Matvey Yunus. The name of this story was The Screen of Life. In this story, one is reminded of the existence of the very same kind of boomerang rocket that the MVD lieutenant described. And a year ago, the well-known scientist and academician Fyodorov, the author of a series of scientific works concerning research of the higher layers of the atmosphere with the help of rockets and Sputniks, with the help of rockets and Sputniks. He said that he hopes that very soon the boomerang rocket will no longer be just a theory but a reality. All of these things support the ideas of Sanderson. I haven't enough time to describe in detail everything that he said. There's an interesting remark of Marshal Zhukov that Mr. Zavalisian has quoted. Marshal Zhukov loved to repeat that cannons are not made to work without shells just for the purpose of placing them in historical museums. Speaking of the history of rockets, Sanderson, having started with ancient China, but after the war, the Russians took the German V-1 and V-2 rockets in their own hands. Sanderson doesn't speak about the role of the Russians in the history of rocket development. The revolutionary Biologics prepared with his own hands the bomb that killed Tsar Alexander II. After he was jailed for this murder, he drew sketches of rocket plans rocket planes on walls of his cell. Not only was this a rocket that he drew, but it was somewhat like the German V-1. That isn't fiction of communist propaganda. It is a well-documented and objectively established fact. The thought of Kibalshish preceded reality by more than 70 years. Imagine if Napoleon had been able to avail himself of rocket weapons research. Would it mean that he would have been able to have atomic weapons from a practical point of view? Well, of course not, because of technical development of civilization. The same thing has been the case in regard to Kibalshish. Professor Oberth, teacher of Werner von Braun, recognized Tsiolkovsky as the founder of the science of modern rocketry. As far back as 1903, Tsiolkovsky published a work handling the exploration of space by means of rocket instruments. In 1929, Tsiolkovsky published a scientific paper about trains of rockets. In this paper, he presented a scheme for a multi-stage rocket device. By means of such a device, both the Soviet and American satellites were launched into space. In the West, Tsiolkovsky is not well known. Even less is known about his students and followers who worked on rocket development for military purposes. For example, during the First World War, a famous sports car racer and flying ace named Utachkin tried to persuade the Russian defense minister, Sukhomlinov, to allocate means for the production of rocket bombs that had a remote resemblance to the German V-1. Sukhomlinov packed Utachkin directly off to the crazy house. Those followers of Tsiolkovsky, who invented the famous rocket launcher known as the Katyusha, had more luck, however. As is known, during the Second World War, the Katyusha weapon aroused surprise and curiosity as well as jealousy. But it was developed and produced without any help whatsoever from the Germans. This doesn't mean that I agree on all points with Mr. Sanderson. When he says that the Russians captured German military secrets and weapons, I believe this is true. But I would like to remind you that one should not disregard the inborn Russian talent and the latitude of the Russians' imagination. Here it is interesting to remember the words of the Russian writer Alexander Green, which expressed in 1915 in his novel Gunner from Azerbaijan and discussed in the magazine Neva. The tragedy of our science lies in the fact that there is a cleft between scientific imagination and its practical application. The strength of German science, however, lies in the unity of imagination and practical experience. In the case of our victory over Germany, there may appear the union of German and Russian scientists. Besides opening the sluices for irresistible fantasies, these fantasies will materialize. That is what the Russian writer Alexander Green said in 1915. These words sound prophetic. That which didn't occur during the First World War did during the Second. Let us admit that the union of Russian and German scientists was established in a barbaric way through violent force. But bold Russian fantasies, with the help of the Germans, were actually put into practice. And that explains a lot. Psychologically, there is much in common between the Hitler and Soviet regimes, but you cannot compare the situation of the scientists in both of these totalitarian states. With Hitler, there was a romantic spirit which inspired both scientists and soldiers. But with the communists, that spirit has been missing for a long, long time. Let us recall Wells's The First People on the Moon. In this novel, the Selenites, or inhabitants of the moon, are raised in containers which limit their size. Only these creatures' feelers are permitted to grow out of the containers, and only those feelers that are useful to the collective. Russian scientists may be compared with these moon dwellers.
Yes. Ivan?
Well, I was going to say something serious, but in the meantime, Sven passed a note to me saying He is a fantastic universe in himself, meaning you, John.
Well,
I think
thank you
it's one of
very
the
much.
greatest compliments I've ever heard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ullman. Thank you, sir. I also had one from Lester.
Yes?
He said a little, I've been trying to get him on for a long while. And everybody tells me Del Rey will never come on. He wants no part of these weird things that you talk about. But at least he said, you're a good pitchman.
Oh, wonderful.
Very good.
John, I'd like to bring up a subject that Sven can tell you something about. Long, long before anybody ever heard of a flying saucer in the United States of America, the Swedish people were much concerned by things called ghost planes. And take it up from there, William. Just
well, the parallel is perhaps not very close, Ivan, but there is one curious thing about it that I think perhaps has some relevance or could make one reflect a bit when discussing this question: could there be such a thing? Is there such a thing? And it is this. One often hears the suggestion that it is nothing but an optical phenomenon and some weird kind of refraction in various layers of the atmosphere. I don't know technically how it is being explained, but certainly you will agree that there are these attempts at explanations given. They may be right, I don't know. But the parallel that occurred to me has to do with these ghost planes that I'm amazed that you're informed about. Before the war, when there was no such thing as radar, and observations, therefore, were that much more difficult, a somewhat disquieting thing started happening in the northern part of Sweden, in Lapland, where very few people live, but which is an important part, and also, if you think in strategical terms, you might say a vital area. Strange light phenomena were seen there. One didn't know what it was. It seemed as though it was some kind, or at least some people suggested this might be some very high-flying aeroplane. And gradually this thing began to be called the phantom planes, or the ghost planes, if I translate it into English. And every now and then there would be a dispatch in the papers. Now another observation had been made of such a ghost plane. And there were the weirdest theories about it, including, and that is what makes me think of this as a somewhat of a parallel of the discussion with these UFOs, including the suggestion that it was just some kind of light, of optical phenomenon with a natural explanation. I remember, now we know, I should say this, preface it by this again. Later it did become quite clear that this was a kind of air reconnaissance of the northern areas of the Scandinavian Peninsula. I believe by Russian planes. I wouldn't be held to that if it was that exclusively. Anyway, a very curious episode occurs to me in this connection. I was working at that time on a newspaper in Stockholm, and one evening, very late, one of these dispatches came in about that now they'd been at it again. We did not know that these were planes, mind you, at that time. I'm saying that we know now. Another one of these dispatches came in, the ghost plane flies again. And the man who was to do this story wanted to send for some clippings in the morgue of the paper to see what had been written before and try to coordinate what he had with what had been happening before as to locations and so on. And it turned out the man who minded the morgue had already gone home, and he had to send a copy boy up who was not very well versed in the card index up there in the attic somewhere. And this boy came back and said he couldn't find it. There is nothing about ghost flyers. Well, they had to make do without the clippings that evening. But the next day, some very searching questions were being asked of the man who was responsible for the morgue. And he was asked, "What is this? Have you never saved any clippings about the ghost plane?" And he became very indignant and said, "Of course I have. They're all under Aurora Borealis." What had happened was that the first reports of this had simply been reports of a light phenomenon believed to be some new kind of Aurora Borealis. And then automatically everything that came in, and this has been going on, I think, for a year or two, had been shoved into the same envelope with the Aurora Borealis stuff. And there it was, and the man who ran it normally, of course, knew that by this time it was exactly as when a housewife in the kitchen keeps her salt in something that says flour and her coffee where it says tea. It's just a different kind of orderliness. This has nothing much to do with what we're talking about, except for the parallel between, possible parallel, I should say. I will not vouch for any, the existence of any sources on the strength of this. I would just point to the possibility that things are being interpreted in one way. As long as you don't know what they are, there is no end to the interpretations they can get. And the fact that one interpretation is made does not mean that another may not be the right one.
We need a good IBM filing system.
Sven?
Ivan?
Sven? Oh, do you know
sorry.
Yes. Sven, do you know anything about the reported Swedish government interest in the subject of UFOs that, according to some UFO researchers here, extends back for the past 30, 40 years or so?
No, I'm afraid I cannot elucidate you on that, and I think that no official statements of public admissions to that effect exist. Are there any official admissions as to the interest of the American authorities?
Ivan?
I'm so sorry, I wasn't attending.
The Swedish
I think in all fairness to Ivan, we received a telegram here with a special message.
Yeah,
It's a personal telegram to Ivan, and that's why for a moment he was concentrating on the telegram rather than to our conversation. Do you want to repeat that again, please?
Do you know anything about this? You remember the frequent references to Swedish government interest in UFOs?
Well, not called UFOs, but I understand from a friend of mine that I was at school with, a Swede, that was subsequently in the Swedish Foreign Office, that there had been a lot of peculiar things reported throughout the ages in the sky over Sweden, which of course were not called UFOs or flying saucers or anything of that nature in those days, going way back. And that the Swedish Foreign Office had become considerably distressed about this long before the First World War, and wondered what these things were, particularly types of mirages, which were said to be inexplicable, showing all kinds of things pretty clearly over Stockholm. They are recorded in your newspaper, and I can't pronounce it myself. And that this...
Dagens Nyheter.
I'm afraid.
I can say that.
I'm sorry. I was born at that time, but I was not with the Dagens Nyheter. I'm afraid I never heard of this.
Well, there are two countries in the world where there have been fuss amongst the public and amongst newspaper people, and even with the government, about things in the sky never seen before. Chile and Sweden.
There's a suggestion from an erudite gentleman at my right that these may have been Valkyries.
Well, indeed, in truth. Where did that Sweden? Why not?
Certainly.
Well, they slip over the mountains occasionally.
They didn't confine themselves only to Norway.
I thought they did.
I was wondering if, for a moment, maybe we can spend 5 or 6 minutes on this idea. Some time ago, I had the pleasure of talking with Ivan on the party line, and we were discussing flying saucers, not in the same manner as we are this morning. We were talking about the people who claim that they have had contacts with Venusians, Martians, and what have you, and people, forgetting about the people who claim that they've been there. But I was just wondering if you have an opinion on this, Lester. Not about I know that you have some very definite opinions, but if you'll let me present this first.
We're on the air, Lester.
I have had a lot of people on the program who told us about experiences of meeting Venusians and Martians. I'm not talking about making trips to the other planets, but that these unusual craft arrived in their backyards. And I was just wondering, and I kicked this around with Ivan one morning, and in fact Ben Gross, the Dean of Radio and TV Editors of the New York Daily News and the Sunday News, wrote an entire column about this. My thought is this: is there a possibility that the Russians have a craft that is saucer-shaped that may be arriving in the States here, may be landing in farms and also in apple orchards and what have you, and that there's a possibility that these people are citizens who greet the occupants of these strange-appearing crafts, that they are so sold on these people who get out of the craft that they believe that maybe they may be coming from other planets. In other words, is there a possibility that the Russian government may be sending people to this country claiming that they're Martians and Venusians in order to gain the confidence of the Howard Mengers, the George Van Tassels, the Dan Frys, and people of that type? What do you think about that, Lester Del Rey?
I can't categorically say it's impossible that the Russians could land here. On the other hand, my first question of that is, to what end? You must realize that any spy activity or any propaganda activity, which is as expensive as that, necessarily has to return value received, value paid to the country doing it. It seems to me that in the first place, if they were going to do that, they would soon find out that the only people they could contact that way are people who, at least in my opinion, and in the opinion of a great many other people, are crackpots. Those crackpots are not very influential on the public body at large. The second thing, if they were capable of acting as angels from above and so on, putting on this wonderful act, bringing this wonderful message and so on, why the heck didn't they do it in Hungary where they needed it, instead of in the United States where they don't immediately need it? They could have done it in countries nearer them where it was very much more needed for their own propaganda purposes. And we don't hear many accounts of flying saucers landing in Hungary and talking to the peasants. In fact, that country...
How would we know?
We have heard of a number of accounts of flying saucer sightings in Russia. This is not unusual there. I am sure that...
interplanetary craft?
Now I've got myself into a situation where I'm going to have to try it. Mr. Savalishkin. All right. Can tell you... Well, at least that makes us even. Can tell you more about that than I can. But it does seem that an awful waste of a tremendous expense for very little result.
But if they wanted to land in Hungary, they'd just take a train and
it didn't work very well that way. Wouldn't goodwill do them some good in Hungary? Not after the war over there, but before.
I don't think you...
I think that's a very invalid argument.
Well, I don't think that Lester...
I think the whole thing is invalid. I think, in other words, that it has no propaganda value, and that if it did have propaganda value, they would have used it in their own shaky territory, too.
This is not my idea at all.
No.
My theory is just this.
WOR Radio, 710 on the dial in New York.
The only word that I can think of at the moment.
Credulous.
If we can get a man, let's say 10 or 15 people in New Jersey, 10 or 15 people in all states, in the 48 states of the Union, if we can get these people to believe if they're gullible enough to believe that the occupants of this unusual craft that may be landing in their apple orchards or on their farmland, if they believe that these occupants are coming here to do us good, that they're Venusians and Martians, then, if they happen to be Russians, they can gain the confidence of these people. And should there ever be a time, if the time ever arrives that they need help, they will have 1,000, 2,000, maybe 5,000 people ready at the drop of a hat to help.
I wonder what those 5,000 people could do. In all seriousness, I am looking at the people that they have got. And generally, I don't think those are effective people. They could, at most, paralyze a few localities which have very little military value. The next war is not going to be fought that way. It won't be a slow infiltration. It will have to be a fast one. And I'm sure that the Russians are very aware of that. Of course, you've got to remember that I am moderating some of my statements now, and some of my arguments are not easily presented over the air without a good deal of thought as to how they can be made both low pressure and cogent. Because this whole subject of the contact cases leaves me somewhat irate. But I think that the average contact case would make about the poorest agent that the Russian government could have. Let me put it that way as best I can. And I also remember the YCL. Now, the YCL was a very friendly organization. It wasn't officially the Communist Party, but it was the Young Communist League. You would think that with a bunch of people very dedicated in many ways to the Russian idea, that the Russians would have taken every single pain in the world to protect their contact with the YCL. But they didn't. They were very sloppy in their relations with the YCL. They brushed them off time after time after time. They didn't seem to regard them as of sufficient importance. So I wonder why they would regard these people who would believe an angel from above or from Mars and Venus as being so important.
Lester, the experience that I've had talking with some of these people leads me to believe that they would follow any instruction that a Venusian or a Martian may give them. Now, here's just a thought. I think I heard it on some of the newscasts, something about the Russian government receiving a letter from an American pilot. And this American pilot claimed that he was going to drop an atom bomb, I think, someplace. Did you hear this news?
No, this I hadn't heard.
Is anybody here familiar? Am I correct?
Yes, Malik in London received a letter.
Oh. Yes. My idea is this. If a thing like this can stir up so much interest about the possibility of a pilot dropping a bomb to prove, this is the thought, this is what was incorporated in the letter, this idea, that if he drop a bomb, he may prove to people that the atom bomb is very dangerous. I don't know why he should want to prove that. We know that. It's obvious to everybody at this time. But this pilot, according to his letter, he was trying to say that the American people would then realize that the Russian government is on the right track. Wasn't that the basic idea of this?
Yes.
Now, I feel, after talking to some of these people who claim that they've had contacts with Venusians and Martians, that they would do anything to help not the Russians, but the Venusians and the Martians. Now, the Venusians and the Martians are here to do us only good. I mean, if we believe the story. Don't you think that it would be shocking to the American citizens if an announcement came from Russia that at 3:30 on Tuesday afternoon in the middle of such and such month that a section of a railroad terminal would be blown up? Now, my thought is this, that if there are Russians landing here in this strange appearing craft, in these so-called flying saucers, and they're able to reach enough gullible people who believe that they are not Russians, but that they're Martians or that they're from some other planet, And then these same alleged Martians tell these gullible people to take this package, which contains the message or contains the books, which you're going to distribute in 2 or 3 months from now. Put it in locker number 17 in such and such terminal. This could be done in New York, in Kansas City, in Newark, New Jersey, in Chicago. Then the Russian government would announce not about Martians or Venusians. They would merely say that at 3:30 on such and such afternoon, to show you our power, you will find that a small section of railroad terminals in various parts of the United States of America will be blown up.
Well, look, in the first place, John, if I could accept the flying saucers,
I don't accept
if
them
I could
either,
accept
as
them,
far as
if I could accept any of these contacts had any substance, I might say then that this theory is far more logical than most of the others, far more logical because at least it does present some motive, which is more than most of the others do. It also at least indicates a tangible source on Earth from which they come, and that much at least I'll go along with Ivan in preference to this Mars and Venus and all that nonsense. But I cannot accept the possibility of the contacts having any necessary substance behind them at all. After all, I remember and I'm going to say here the other science fiction crackpot phrases, because flying saucers to too much of an extent got into the whole business through science fiction too. I remember the Darrow craze in Ray Palmer's magazine, and I remember all the people who reported the Darrows. Well, I am quite sure that there were no Darrows, and even the Russians can't explain that. I remember also the people who went out and got cured when Ron Hubbard discovered Dianetics. And incidentally, I heard from somewhere that Ron Hubbard is perhaps one of the space people kicking around. This is only, I don't think so. I think his president was son. His son? That might be interesting. I thought that his own
That's an
Scientology.
unfortunate statement that naturally kicks around a rumor. It's rather
Well,
unfortunate.
I didn't really believe that it was Ron Hubbard anyway. But I would rather believe any fantastic thing like that than to believe even that the Russians took this thing seriously. I don't really think they do. I think that if they did, the United States government would take that possibility into consideration also and keep a careful check on these saucer people. And the check apparently is not that serious.
You had something to add, Hans?
Yes, I want to throw one thing into the hamper. And incidentally, John, I've been noticing Brother Savaltin looking very unhappy here and looked like he wanted to add something too. I want to quote a statement by one of these gentlemen, and obviously I don't want to identify him. I think you'll understand my reluctance to do so over the air. But this particular person says in the course of a public statement, "This is the avenue of approach to eliminate the false nuclear program which is continually poisoning our waters and atmosphere 12 years after the entrance of the atomic age, and is pronounced an unsolved problem of fantastic proportions. Rather than destroy matter and nature with destructive forces, man can begin to utilize the creative energies exhibited by the spaceships in our atmosphere and between the planets." I submit, Lester, that this has a familiar tinge.
No, I'd like to add just that, is that from a few of the contact people who've been on this program, is that every time you mention rocketry or something, this is poo-pooed as a vulgar, brutal way for space travel, and that you're going to have, that there are various other much more subtle ways of utilizing the charges of the electrons in the atmosphere and all the rest of it. Yeah, but this is
Teleporting yourself to Venus.
aside from this. I mean, if this was a concerted effort, I mean, I think John is gullible in thinking that these people are gullible. I don't think they're gullible, but and I apply everything that's implied there. I mean, but the point is that this is a concerted effort to poo-poo all interest in technical advances such as rocketry. It's a vulgar, sort of pushy way of doing it.
I think you all missed the point, if I may say so.
I'm sorry to interrupt at this time, but we have a little business to take care of. Editorial director of Fantastic Universe magazine is with us, Ben Iskowitz, Lester Del Rey, Ivan T. Sanderson, the eminent zoologist, and Ben Iskowitz, the cybernetician. And we have Jim Runyon with us, translator, and a gentleman who was formerly an officer in the Russian army and for a time a prisoner of war in Nazi Germany. He is now an American citizen, but certainly a very well-informed person on the matters that we're discussing this morning. And his name is?
Vyacheslav Zavalishin.
Good? Very good. Was he? He's wonderful. That's dead fine. Real pronunciation. We have been talking with these people about this article, Man-Made UFO. Now, this morning, in talking about flying saucers, we are not talking about the people that have been to Venus, Mars, the Moon, or anything like that. This is a very, very serious discussion. This is not science fiction. That is the article that we're talking about. Possibly Mr. Del Rey feels it's science fiction, but the author, Ivan T. Sanderson, would not agree with that. And remember...
Yes, I would.
You would?
Well, I want to ask Lester something, is that you've been generally poo-pooing most of the ideas that Ivan has brought out in his article, and poo-pooing to me always seems to be sort of the wrong track to take, since I've been sort of conditioned not to regard any idea as too outlandish. Of course, some that I've heard I consider to be way out. But, for instance, I'm reminded of a very funny, which at that time did not seem particularly funny, incident that once happened to a friend of mine who was working on a classified project. There's a third friend who's pretty irresponsible in most of his actions, and he went to Mexico on a vacation. He thought it would be a great joke, especially since this friend who was working on classified material, his security clearance was coming up for renewal. So he sent him a nice little postcard from Mexico City saying, "Dear so-and-so, having a wonderful time, have absconded to Mexico with atomic secrets," and signed his name. Now, the FBI got very interested in this postcard, and it took a long time to explain the fact that this was a joke. And then they were pretty upset by the fact that, since when is this a thing to joke about? Now, if they can get concerned about something which, after all, was nothing but a prank, why shouldn't they be concerned about the fact that there are rumors, there are stories, there are allegations, there are whisperings, there are murmurings that the Russians have developed a circular foil spacecraft that has the fantastic performances that have usually been associated with flying saucers, especially in view of the fact that sometime this year the United States is going to fly, or try to fly for the first time, the X-15, which will be the first rocket ship ever put, or as far as we know, the first rocket ship put up by mankind, in that it is actually no longer a conventional aircraft. It's I think its short little stubby wings are about 3 feet long. It's just used to get it off the ground. And actually, in designing the plane, the engineers had a re-entry problem with it because its height is so fantastic. For all practical purposes, it is a spaceship. Now, if this, according to what we think, is the furthermost advanced mankind has ever reached in a rocket ship, this all becomes pretty laughable if the Russians already have ships that have performance characteristics of flying saucers, and this is something we should be very concerned about, whether or not it is true.
Well, I'm not... first, let me say that this is not the first rocket ship. It's the first rocket ship capable of rising to heights over 25 miles or so.
So that's
we have the present one.
Actually, it's going to go into a region that we could very
we
easily
could almost call space.
Yeah.
But now look, if I were Army intelligence, I would not poo-poo anything. If it were my business to examine all possibilities, no matter how remote, because even one remote one slipping through could endanger the country, then I would be on my toes, I think, just as the FBI has to examine even the most outlandish and fantastic kidnapping cases and things like that. They're supposed to, at least. And as a matter of fact, the absence of certain investigations in Pearl Harbor proved to be very fatal. They were fantastic, and they had every reason for disregarding them from their point of view at the time. I think that there is too much of a tendency in official circles to poo-poo. But to a man who is essentially a professional dilettante, whose opinion is of no great vital importance to the country, these things are not so vitally important, and I have to restrict myself to accepting that which to me has enough evidence to make it worth accepting. In other words, I have to see how it will work, or why it will work, or why there is some good reason that I should accept it first. Now, this may sound strange from a science fiction writer, but if you don't do that, you can't write good science fiction. You're writing nothing but the most outlandish fantasy. It's a trained habit. The scientist has to have it, too. He cannot have a completely open mind. The minute he opens his mind completely, he does not have enough judgment left to pick those fields where the probabilities are high enough to justify the work on them. In other words, if you want to let's say, well, now anything is possible, and go dithering around, searching through every improbable but possible thing, you come up with so much wasted effort that you never get anywhere. Science automatically has to restrict itself.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, the very fact that once you make up your mind, if you had a completely open mind, no one would ever do anything because you'd always be considering all alternatives. So once you decide upon a course of action, for that moment you have a closed mind, and this is not the regrettable sounding thing it is. Sometimes it's very good to have a closed mind, but that is not exactly the point. If it is true the Russians had developed a saucer-like craft, especially in view of the fact that right after the war, everyone got so concerned about what was being taken out of Germany and all the rest of it, and that I think Ivanson mentioned in his article something like German rockets secrets were being sold as army surplus for $1 a sheet or something. This is a fantastic bungle if this is true.
I believe they had been picked through, but very carelessly picked through first.
What I cannot understand is this. There was an agreement between the Russian allies and what we now call the Western allies, that we would divide up the spoils. Now, we both arrived at about the same time at certain points. And as I understand it, and I'm very sorry, but having been brought up on the other side, I rather respect this magazine flying, this RAF publication here. And it states that we both arrived at the same point at the same time. Now, presumably, the Germans had developed something which was worthwhile having, because after all, we didn't have a V2, let's face it. They did. I was on the receiving end. You weren't over here. The thing worked badly, but it worked. I would have imagined that if we got there, we'd want to try and find out what was going on. What I cannot understand is this: why these things were given to our allies, our Eastern allies, the Russians, and why we didn't get them first. Here in this paper, it states categorically that Werner von Braun, now our biggest hope, was left lying around for 3 or 4 months there. Nobody even had the intelligence to ask him a question. I can quote from here. I've been reading it during the coffee break. To me, that's the horrifying. I simply want to know if anybody does know what was going on, what they really did find, not just these little statements in these magazines, official or otherwise, and where the things went to, and if they had got to the point that these magazines state that the Germans had got to. Do you follow me?
Yeah.
Have we, both of us, East and West, sat on our hands and done nothing further? Here we have from the gentleman on our left here, who was in the Russian army, the statement, the statement was read before, that the Russians had been developing rocketry and had thoughts about them from way back to 1909, 1915. They were thinking the way we were. The Germans were thinking, and on this side, we were lagged behind. Goddard did many great things. Wait a minute, let me finish. Excuse me. I cannot understand. I want to know what actually did go on. And why did they suddenly stop? If they'd got that far, is it a complete blank, so nothing has happened any further than that? Nothing seems to have happened very much here. We're still using parts, I understand, of this A4, or V2, to get our explorers into the air. I am not, as I say, an engineer, and I don't really understand very much except what I read, just like any ordinary person in the paper. I'm speaking for the ordinary person tonight. Have the Russians not proceeded? And if the Germans had got as far as these papers say they had at the end of the war, and the Russians did get this stuff, somebody gave it to them, let them take it, have they just simply sat on their hands and done nothing since then? My goodness, if the Germans could bomb in 1945, they could bomb from Germany to London, which indeed they did with their V2s. Where's the time lag? Why haven't the people who took over all these great inventions, and the scientists, as everybody I think admits, both of us did on both sides, have they developed nothing in that time?
Lester? Well, now I'm going to stop poo-pooing because I agree 100% with Ivan and many of the things he says. And this is a serious problem. As to von Braun, I think that the answer is that he was picked up by the military, and he was a civilian. Our military men, just as the German military men would have done had the situation been reversed, seemed to think that the important man was the military man. It was Dornberger, I believe.
Yeah.
And they paid almost no attention to civilians. And they treated him with a good deal of contempt, because obviously the man at the head of this would be a military man. And his casual statement that he might have had something to do with it wouldn't interest them. There was a great deal of just plain muddle-headedness.
Well, I'll tell you something else. If you stop nipping in here, and I'm going to get rather angry on this subject, not with you personally or with anybody else personally, but I do happen to know, I don't know whether the American intelligence did, but the British intelligence knew who were the persons, civilian or otherwise, who were running the rocket project in Germany. I know they know that, because I was in that service in a very, very minor capacity, and right on the thin end, and if I knew it, I'm certain the people in the middle knew it. The people they should have gone to first of all, whether they did or whether they didn't, I do not know. But according to this article, again I refer to it, this RAF article, they did go to them, asked some questions, and they went away and left the whole thing. And they went back again. Now, I'm not arguing with that. There's a muddle at the end of a war. I've seen the end of a war, and you have. And it's a colossal muddle. But the point I'm trying to make is this, and I'm sorry to drag this awful flying saucer business in, this UFO business in again. Throughout the ages, people have said they've seen things in the sky, but starting in 1947, 2 years after the war, there were certain professional flyers who said, we have seen some things in the sky that really do alarm us, because they look like planes. And then constantly it is reported or rumored that such type of aeroform, and let's cut out the circular ones, just simply say advanced planes. Because after all, there was a time when people were told that there were angels in the sky. By George, they saw a meteorite and they said they were. I mean, people can convince themselves of what they have been told they expect to see in the sky, they're going to see. All right, now these competent flyers, 2 years after the termination of the war, said they had seen things in the sky. In fact, Kenneth Arnold, I don't know if you know this, John, was sent out, amongst others, as professional flyers to search for a plane, an official plane, which had been downed near Mount Rainier, allegedly containing some very important persons. I have asked people who want to know who were those important persons, and they all smile and say, well, yeah, we've heard that too, but we never were able to get the answer. But,
what does Kenneth Arnold say about it?
Well, you had him on the... No, didn't you have him on the program?
No, I had him on the beaver phone.
He has simply said that he was asked as a competent individual out there to go out and help search for a government plane that had been downed. And when he was searching for it, they saw, according to his story, a number of strange objects which looked like planes but seemed to behave very much better than any plane that we had at that time. All I'm asking is, what is all this about? And you gentlemen around this table know a great deal more about it than I do. You may be able to contribute something to it. I think it's about time that somebody made a statement saying either categorically the Germans did not develop these various weapons, did not have these other weapons or satellite-type things on their drafting board, or they did. And if they did, how many went to Russia and how many came here? And thirdly, what have we done with those that we got? And what do we know about what the Russians have done with what they got?
Ivan, let me ask you one question in reference to the article in the book, Man-Made UFO in Fantastic Universe Science Fiction. What is this story about the plans being sold by our government as war surplus for $1 per sheet or $1 per plan?
John, you're a publicist. In this article, I stated categorically that according to a small mimeographed job put out by a man called Jim Mosley, whose name you know.
We've had him on the...
You've had him on the air, you know. He's interested in strange things. And that I simply quoted from him, and I stated in there that I was so quoting from him. And he, in turn, was quoting from... I haven't got my right glasses on. Stefan, read it from me. Would you?
He was quoting from some chapters in a book, Vienen los Platillos Volantes, The Coming of the Saucers, written in Spanish by Enrique Miguel Borges. These particular chapters of the book were written by Ulrich von Riffner, a former officer in the Special Technical Services of the German Army. Borges is of the opinion that the origin of saucers is still a mystery, that he turned over some chapters of this book to von Rittner, who believes in a terrestrial solution. It is a mild understatement. In all fairness to Jim Moseley, who has appeared on this program and whom some of us at least know, and who published the issue of Source News where this translation appeared, I think we should add, however, that Moseley continued in his preface to say this: "We do not believe that the story you are about to read is true in every detail, but von Rittner does give you some very important information that has not previously been published in this country."
You see, John, what I was trying to do in this article was to put together, and I think I make that quite clear in several paragraphs, they may be rumors, but they are published statements. And if they're lies, somebody in authority or not in authority get up and say so. And if they get up and say so, they should say why so. I've simply tried to put together as many of these facts as I could. Now, I do not feel that this magazine here, this RAF magazine for July, Flying, is going to lie. And some of the things they say in here coincide very closely with what my engineer told me, and what Moseley says, and what this Swedish publication takes from the
But Moseley
ex-NKVD.
has a preface to the article, doesn't he, where he makes the statement that
He doesn't think all the facts in here are true, but he is...
So, in other words, he gives you the entire article. He tells you that all of the facts are not true, but he doesn't tell you which ones are true or untrue.
John, now you're quibbling. If you pardon me...
I don't want to quibble.
Well, listen a moment. He states in here, I am going to now print, in quotes, which he does, certain sections from a book. He, or I, we, editorial, do not believe that all the statements in this are true. We don't know. He doesn't know any more than I do. And I went to long pains to explain in the article in this magazine, Fantastic Universe, that I was quoting from him. But I'm not trying to bring evidence for anything. I'm simply trying to put together, John, statements that had been made and published by a large number of different people. And they have been made, and they keep on cropping up. They've been cropping up since the end of the war. And they have not a ring of truth, but they have the same thread running all the way through. You can go back and say that there's been a thread running, the same thread running through ghosts, for instance, for years and years and years. All right, but this is a much more serious subject. I mean, we do have planes that do certain things, and what this type of flying saucer, not all UFOs, please, but some kinds which flyers say they're worried about. They don't worry about crackpot's ideas or inversions of hot air by Mr. Menzel or anything else, but these kind of things they do get very worried about, and these statements are anent that type of UFO, and I want to know what it's all about. That's all, and I simply am presenting here nothing else but a number of statements that have been published.
Dennis, I would like to bring up something that perhaps Ivan remembers hearing about, is something also about a weird story that people should have gotten worried about, and which they did, and which turns out to be very frightening when it finally came out, is that at the time that Einstein wrote his famous letter to President Roosevelt about the possibility of making an atomic bomb, there was a sentence in it that turned out to be very prophetic. It said, other countries may be working on this right now. And then I think right around that time, there were reports coming out of a German factory and laboratory off the coast, on the coast of Norway, that I think British intelligence had that something funny was going on. That lots of stuff came in and nothing came out, and they thought possibly it was a new kind of aircraft fuel, but they weren't sure about it, so they sent a commando team down there, and they blew up the factory. And they found out the Germans were working on deuterium, and they actually had very cogent plans for making atomic bombs. I mean, this is a wild story, but it turned out to be true.
Exactly. Absolutely true. And the Germans made the big mistake of thinking that they couldn't use anything but deuterium as a moderator, so they didn't get the atom bomb.
Yeah, but the point was they were thinking.
They were thinking.
I mean, they may have been subsequently, as afterthought, we realized that uranium was the right way to do it, and they were off. But they were thinking about it, and they actually had a plant in a laboratory, which was a fantastic thing to conceive, when all we had was a letter from Einstein. It's a very penetrating article also that we haven't mentioned that's very pertinent tonight. It's an article called Robert Goddard, Space Pioneer, and it's written by Dr. G. Edward Tendre, who is, among other things, a consultant to the Committee on Astronautics and Space Exploration for the House of Representatives. And there are one or two sentences I would like to read, I think really startling. He talks about Goddard, who tried to interest the armed forces in the potential of rockets in 1940, that he got a polite brush-off, which cost us an unchallenged lead in rockets and satellites today. And then later on in the article, it goes on to state that in May 1945, only 3 months before Goddard's death, captured German rocket experts were asked by U.S. Army specialists about the V-2s that rained death on London in the last month of World War II. To the American surprise, a member of the German group replied, quote, "You have the man in your country who knows all about rockets and from whom we got all our ideas, Robert H. Goddard," unquote. This is a fantastic idea about the fact that V-2 technology stemmed straight from an American who, at the same time that the V-2 specialists were building rockets and going ahead with these amazing plans, was being brushed off by our own army. This is in the September issue, right?
Yes, the same issue as the other.
The same issue as Ivan's article in Blessed.
One could argue about it.
John, may I add that we do have some fiction in that too. I mean, I hope nobody gets the idea that we have turned into an article magazine. We have a lot of very good fiction.
One very good novelette by Damon Knight.
That I can't begin to. I agree completely with you.
Good. Jim Runyon, go ahead, Ivan. I'm sorry. Did you want to add something first?
Well, just a little scrib in there that what Ben read a moment ago, I think that all people, and particularly my good friend Lester Del Rey, should think over. That time and time again, you get professionals who know about a certain amount about something saying, well, that's it. We got these bottles full of water to the top, and we can't spend our time looking for the water that won't get in the bottle. I've seen it in my specialty, zoology, over and over again. The coelacanth fish, impossible. They've been dead for 60 million years. I have 2 clippings for the same man. I keep on repeating this. 10 years later, he comes out AP again and says, we always expected to catch one of these fish because it is, after all, a shallow water fish. It's not as a... What's it got to do with it? Let's be not completely open-minded, because then you do go fluey. But let's realize that some people can feel a marchness occasionally. Thoughts and ideas, they progress. And sometimes they can take a big jump on you. And you don't realize. You wake up one day and you get a V2 on your head. I saw that happen over in London. Sorry, John, I've seen...
No, before we get back with Jim Runyon, we have a couple of telegrams. Do you want to read those first, then?
Well, this is from Hackettstown, New Jersey. It's addressed to Ivan Sanderson.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that a personal telegram?
It doesn't seem to be. What about the beryllium sale?
No, that's a personal telegram. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that, Ivan. It was lying on the table. And take the other telegram.
This one is from New York City, addressed to Long John. Try and land one of your flying saucers in Kansas. Signed, O.L. Comstock.
What happened here?
That's the telegram. Try and land one of your flying saucers in Kansas. Obviously, they think we're going to try and invade Kansas.
Do they think you're in Nebraska?
Well, I don't know. All right, next one.
No, wait a second. Kansas is a dry state.
He mentioned that they had alcohol in the fuel. That's what it is. Now he got the thing.
This is from Flushing, New York. Long John. And the person wishes their name be withheld. Former British pilot confessed letter to Malik was hoax.
Yes, I know that. I had that in a recent newscast that it's been proven to be a hoax.
Well, we've been sort of, disregarding one member of the panel tonight, and I would like to ask Mr. Zavalishin.
Oh, you're great, Ben. You're great.
Because I'm really a Russian. Is that the truth? If the FBI is listening, I'm only kidding.
You want to know something? I guess I better not say.
Well,
no, go ahead.
Don't do that. I better not say.
No, I won't say. Go ahead.
If you can care about anything that seriously, though, I don't know whether to believe you or not.
That's the attitude I used to get, too. I would like to ask him, especially since he was a former Russian army officer and he was a prisoner of war in Nazi Germany, if I wonder if Jim Runyon would do this for me, and if Mr. Zavalishin ever did see any of these alleged A7 ships that look so much and perform so much what we hear flying saucers to be. Could you do that?
А вы когда-нибудь видели этого немецкого предмета, так называемого A7 ship?
Нет.
Никогда не видел.
I understood that.
Yes, but maybe I didn't understand it.
Yes?
But he has a rather incredulous look about the whole thing anyway.
He says no. Did he see any developments either in Russia or in Germany of advanced rocket development?
Ракетные развитие, да. Вы когда-нибудь в Германии видели?
Ракетное развитие?
Да.
В Германии?
Когда вы были в Германии, вы сами видели? No, he has not. In fact, I believe probably his only experience with this type of thing in general has been in meeting people from the Soviet Union who had some contributions.
He himself has never seen any of these.
No, he has not.
Does he know of any either? Are there any Russian or German experts he's spoken to who did report some of these things, besides the ones he mentioned previously?
За исключением этих примеров, которые вы дали нам, да, вы знаете о другом человеке, например, который сказал вам что-то об этом?
Yes. Yes.
You have?
Yeah, I have, yes.
Would he tell us about it?
Будьте добры рассказывать мне.
Это относительно ракет.
Да. It's concerning the rockets.
In Germany, was assistant Russian movie director Zhuravlev. Mr. Zhuravlev, together with Tsiolkovsky, worked movie picture Cosmic Race. And after war, assistant Mr. Zhuravlev was by Soviet Russian technical film. Excuse me, please. Переведите, пожалуйста. Он снимал эти секретные снимки вот с заводов V1 и V2.
He took these secret.
You celebrate with Jim. Thank you very much, Jim. Go ahead.
He was able to take these secret items concerning the V1 and the V2 rockets. So he actually was quite a specialist as far as really knowing what the situation was. Yeah.
Скажите, заводы, где эти делали вещи, они были разрушены. Но всю эту картину, значит, он, так сказать, кинокамерой воспроизвел. Но это были секретные, значит, так сказать, снимки, которые большевики делали. Я с ним имел как раз беседу об этом.
The factories and so forth in which these were being developed were destroyed in the process of the war. But the secret plans and photos and so forth were available.
Yes.
And after Zhuravlev,
Assistant Mr. Zhuravlev.
Mr. Zhuravlev managed to get hold of these photographs. Well, you talked with him then.
Assistant Mr. Zhuravlev worked together with Tsiolkovsky. И скажите, что он мог сравнить то, что, так сказать, делали ученики и последователи Циолковского, с тем, что он уже сам снимал у немцев. Вот что это самое главное. Вот переведите.
Assistant Mr. Zhuravlev actually worked with Tsiolkovsky, and he is able, because of the availability of these photographs, is able to compare what reality is to him from them with the followers of Tsiolkovsky.
So from his extensive work with filming, making these technical films about the V2, does he have any sort of ideas about how far advanced the Germans could have gotten to an A7 ship? One that Ivan described in his article? Does he have any idea? I mean, I realize he said he never saw one, but does he think they could possibly have had one?
Из этих материалов, которые ассистент Журавлев имел, да, вы думаете, что у него была мысль
о чем мысли?
Да, достижений немцев.
Вот
по поводу A7 ship, да?
Нет. Но он, значит, сказал вот то же самое, что примерно говорил Грин, что практический опыт немцев и фантазия русских, она вот именно их сочетание может дать совершенно новые открытия. New discovery. Вот это вы переведите, пожалуйста.
Посмотрите,
что вот это то, что немцы достигли с этим да. И вот русская фантазия, соединение этих вещей позволит русским продвинуться вперед. Вот этот союз немецких и русских ученых. Jim?
I'm not quite sure about this. I think he's saying that.
So do you want to let him repeat it in a different way? Do you want to tell him to repeat it again for you? And maybe, because very frankly, I'm at a loss. For a moment, I thought we had the mystic Barbara with us. I don't understand it at all, I'm sorry to say. Want to try it again, Jim?
Значит так. Те достижения, что были у немцев, плюс то, что задумали русские, in future, в будущем, дадут новые открытия для русской науки. Understand?
Yes, the achievements that the Germans had at the time can actually be compared with the earlier almost fantastic concepts that many Russians had, and that actually these achievements have given a great deal to the Russians in their development.
Yeah, but does he think that it was possible? Oh, I'm sorry. But does he think that it was possible that, from what he knows of what was going on in Germany at the end of the war, that a circular type of rocket-propelled plane could have been developed?
Из этого сведения, которое вы знаете, вы думаете, что было возможно, что круглый тип самолета в будущем, как сказать, будет развитым, да.
Скажите, что
из этого сведения,
не только из этого сведения, но сами большевики, я сейчас, 3 источника у них есть, 3 магазина, говорят, что именно в будущем это возможно.
He knows of 3 different magazines who say yes, that they very definitely felt that this was possible from the information that was
Ivan, may I ask another question? Do you know anything about, back to this UFO sightings in Russia? Had there been any reports of ghost planes or mysterious things in the sky that he knew of before he was captured and went to Germany? Or afterwards, for that matter? I mean, have they a thing going on over there? Have they had a thing going on over there like we have had here? Either before the war or after, that there are mysterious things in the sky?
Вы знаете, рассказы.
Can you come in a little closer, Jim, please, so they can hear? Thank you.
Вы, когда вы были в Советском Союзе, это перед тем, как вы приехал в Германию, да?
Да-да.
Вы когда-нибудь слышал о людях, которые видели эти предметы? Это так называемые летающие предметы.
Скажите, до войны не слышал. После войны не только слышал, но и читал.
Before the war, no, he had not heard of it. After the war, not only has he heard much about it, but also has read a great deal about it.
So in other words, they have had the same kind of sightings, as we call them over here, of unknown objects in the sky, huh?
Yes,
right, Jim?
yes, after the war. Or at least he knows of people who have seen and heard of them after the war.
Jim, just a minute. Но советская пропаганда эти слухи высмеивала.
The Soviet propaganda actually is laughing at these rumors.
But they're still occurring in Russia. I mean, in communist-controlled territory.
Yes.
They're still cropping up, and they get published sometimes.
Yes.
Yes.
And any kind of description of them? I mean, are they just mysterious things seen in the sky? Any contact? I mean, you don't probably understand this strange jargon that's grown up. And it, I mean, has...
No, вы слышали о людях, которые, как у нас в Америке, как говорили после войны, что они имели контакты с этими предметами.
Был описан один такой случай.
There's been written at least one of these cases. Yeah.
First have landed and actually talked to the people.
Yes.
Only
Speak High German?
Yes.
What language do they speak when they land?
Скажите, что
На каком языке они говорили?
на каком языке?
Да.
Вот об этом этот случай был описан в журнале «Наука и жизнь», но о языке не говорит. И считается, что это, слух, так сказать, вздор, что ли,
Well, it said, of course, it's actually only a rumor, but he said it was written как это было еще раз?
В журнале «Наука и жизнь».
The Journal of Scientific Life. This account. There was not verbal contact.
Джим, just a minute. Но этот журнал говорил, что это неправда, он трус.
Publication in Russia. In spite of the fact that the journal did publish the story, they deny the truth of it.
Вот скажи, picture Little Remember, movie Miracle in Milan. Вот вы расскажите, что там эти староверы уже собирали свои вещи, чтобы их на этом круглом предмете взяли на третье небо живьем.
He said that the old believers in Russia who have seen these objects and so forth packed up their stuff in order. Well, they feel that this is out of outer space, and they had packed up their stuff to
leave.
Yeah.
You mean to go to other planets or to leave Russia?
No, other planets. To the other planets. Yeah.
Other planets without collective fun.
What happened to? Oh, he just stepped down now. No,
Yeah.
fine.
I got a question here, John.
Ivan?
May I ask, which one of our friends here has been asking me, and I'd like, this is probably directed at Lester. He probably will know more about it. There have been reports, and I've read them, of when the Germans were experimenting with the V2, that they picked an inhabited island in the Baltic, which was exactly the same distance from Peenemünde that London is. I don't quite figure that out geographically, but still, I have heard this story, and that they, to see if the V2 worked, they fired this rocket at this Baltic island, off the coast of one of the Baltic states, and it went off duly and made a large hole in the ground. Fortunately, did not kill many people. I'd like to ask if you've ever heard of that one. I've heard of it several times.
I have heard of it, but I have also heard it denied. And I do know that they fired some of their rockets from Poland into the Baltic. So it may have landed somewhere about halfway between Peenemünde and Poland, and somebody decided that that's what they were doing. I think that's mostly a propaganda story, though.
Yeah, it sounds like it. If it was, it would be interesting to know who gave the instructions to do that, the army or the civilian persons who were supposed to be in charge of rocket experiments, wouldn't it?
I think that they were far more interested in finding out what it would do than they were in killing anybody with it right then. And also, there would be too much danger that somebody might live through it and come out and spread the story afterwards in a case like that.
Sounds very much like it. That was passed to me by a friend of ours here at the station. I'm glad to get your opinion on it. May I go back to the profundities that we're at, or trying to get at? We've got a little information this evening. I still want to find out, basically, where these continuing stories come from. Has anybody got any further ideas?
I suspect that some of them are a hangover from the days when the Germans were handing out deliberate propaganda stories in advance of the V2 in order to try to frighten people even more. I think that some of that may have still lasted.
That's a very good point, Lester. One that I thought of, too. I remember during the war, I was in a fairly secured position, heard a certain amount of what was going on, and I remember when the buzz bombs started landing on London, I was with my then boss, ultimately superior boss, and I asked him about this is a pretty bad show. And he said, it's much worse to come. The next thing we believe is coming is about the size of a house. Well, sure enough, it arrived in the form of the V2. And I happened to see him. He'd then been transferred, and so had I. And we met again before the end of the war, and another country, and I said to him, what's coming next? And he said, this is going to be awful. He said, we understand the next thing is going to go down with a whoosh. And I said, what do you mean? He said, this thing is going to be even larger, and it's going to be properly guided this time. Now, if you look into this article we've been talking about this evening, quotes from, again, I think on this particular occasion, Jim Mosley, that his alleged German officer, von Rittner, he keeps on talking about guiding these planes by, I don't know what the exact term he uses, but he was getting at the directional Hertzian waves.
Well, those Hertzian waves, of course, would be nothing but radio waves. That's an elaborate way of saying something.
Exactly. In other words, radio
old-fashioned.
That's right. Radio control. Now, am I right?
Well, they have much better systems.
Yeah, sure, I know. But I mean, nothing else but...
even then they had more reliable systems, because after all, those things can be jammed. And I don't think that they might have been trying to find a jam-free method, but I don't think they
an inertial guidance system is self-contained, and once it starts, nothing will interfere with it.
Did they not use for the V2 a cone?
I don't know. Weren't the V2s radio controlled?
No, the V2s, I believe some of them were radio controlled on the way up, but they had to take over by themselves after that. And I think the ones that were sent on London were sent all the way on their own. All they did there was to send them up with the idea that after they aimed them first. Yeah. They were not sent straight up as a modern rocket is. They were rotated in such a way that they would be aimed.
Yeah.
And they took off at a specified angle. And when they reached a certain speed or height, I don't know which it worked on, they were designed to tilt.
Yeah.
And that was supposed to take care of. From there on, the controls were all up to the normal trajectory.
Uh-huh.
And that apparently is the way it was done.
Another thing I stumbled across when I was reading all this stuff was that they had a cone, radio cone. In other words, they're projecting on a beam to the right and from the left, and just make it simple to imagine it two-dimensionally up, and that the rockets were fired up, and if they went too much to the right, they would hit a directional beam, which would trigger something to push them back into the center, and then if they went too far to the left, or actually tridimensionally in any direction, they'd be pushed back into this cone until they were free at the top. And then after that, they were on their own, and they tilted over.
I suspect they would have missed in that way anyway, because they didn't really have enough fuel for very much maneuvering.
No, but that's a way out. That's
the controls nowadays are almost instantaneous. In an inertial guidance system is actually a small computer that goes into the rocket itself, and the thing is aimed at a certain spot, and the computer knows what course, where above the Earth the rocket must arrive at. Because it has to be at a certain spot to start its free fall, to hit that certain spot, and the computer knows where this place is, and also any variations, the second the slightest variations in wind pressure or direction come in, the computer will shift the controls to correct for this, so the rocket will always get to that point from which it can fall, go into free fall, and hit that desired spot. And the terrible thing about an inertial guidance system is that once they're off, they're on their own. Nothing will ever stop them. In other words, you push a button and it's off. You can't say, "Come back now." I'm sorry, I didn't mean it.
You can make them blow up.
You can explode them. By remote control, which they've done with the Vanguards. And then the Vanguard started veering, they would blow them up from the ground.
Well, it has to be that way, because if there's any possibility of jamming it, you can't use that system. And I know of no radio system which cannot somewhere or other be jammed.
Yeah.
Sure.
You also fool them, too.
Yes. You might even be able to reverse them, and that would be very bad.
Now, let me come to one more. Yes, right.
Well, that's the idea. When someone suggested, sending by rocket an atom bomb up and hitting the face of the moon, someone said, well, maybe the moon will start shooting one back.
Well, there are other good reasons for not doing it, but I think they're going to do it anyway.
Well, we can't divulge that information this morning anyway. After all, they recently had the groundbreaking ceremony down the moon when they started to drill the hole from the light side to the dark side.
You mean there's a dark side? Hasn't somebody found out that the moon rotates?
Please. Now, let's loud enough by the
Why do you think I'm here?
This is when Howard was there, wasn't he?
Oh, the potato farm.
Yeah.
Oh.
You tell us about it.
These potatoes are different. They grow on trees.
That's nice.
Ivan?
How about the skip plane?
Well, that, was the idea behind the A9A10.
Yes, right.
The idea that it would go up to a certain level of the atmosphere and then pick up speed, or it would pick up speed before it got there, and then it would dive back in a little and jump. And they hoped to, as a matter of fact, to get almost 3,000 miles range doing that.
I understand that from another article that I read also in a British magazine that the Russians have developed a sort of prototype which will do a little skipping. It goes up far enough, and it can be manned, and it takes very much less fuel than our great big rockets, and it can do, in other words, if we just concentrate on that, we would have to do a little less in our rocket race.
Obert suggested that quite a long time ago.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, Willie Ray also gave a fair amount of description in his rocket missiles and space travel to that. It's quite an interesting concept.
In the first... In his second
edition, at least, he did. The one I haven't gotten his new one.
Have you heard about that, John? The idea is to get up above the dense atmosphere, get up enough speed, and then swoop down, cut up your engine, and go and bounce off the atmosphere and keep on bouncing.
Operation Grasshopper.
Yeah, much the same way as you skim a flat rock close to the water.
It's actually like a flying saucer. Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be lenticular in shape.
No, it doesn't have to be, no. Not at all, but I mean...
The X-15 is not lenticular. It has more or less conventional shape.
Shape, yeah.
Yes, I mean, if you look at it, you can vaguely imagine it looks like an airplane.
But are there any engineers at this table? Were you near?
That would ruin the conversation.
No, it sure would. No, but
I'm a machinist, if that'll do you any good.
well, I want to ask a very simple question about this whole business of the possibility of a lenticular-form plane. There's one thing that puzzles me very much. It is perfectly true that if you just throw a coin any old way, it'll go so far. But if you take it in your finger and throw it so the flat surface is horizontal, to make it ever simple, it will go further. Mm-hmm. Now, the object itself is spinning. Now, what is actually the effect, or what would be the effect of having this flange revolving and the main body not being itself skipped or thrown into a twist?
Well, if that thing were designed with proper aerodynamic shape, there would be, after all, the normal system of the variations in pressure between the top and the bottom with movement. In other words, it would have the normal lift at the top and pressure at the bottom, but because of its airfoil shape at the edge. Mm-hmm. Now, if you spin it, obviously it is carrying a larger surface layer of air with it, and it might have some extra lift from that, just as it would in moving. In other words, it's moving around and around instead of forward.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the most efficient way of gaining lift, and I think that that's why it works fine in toys. They haven't used it too much in other things. Well, it has been tried.
You know, I'm very worried about something. Many years ago, I would say about 1926 or 27, there was a very wonderful picture called Shape of Things to Come was by H.G. Wells, wasn't it?
Yes.
Well, this wasn't that. It had that wonderful Swedish actor in it, L. Brendel. Do you remember him, or were you too young for
you
that?
aren't thinking of, what is it, Metropolis?
No, not Metropolis. It was another picture about the same time. And it was delightful. He dropped into the world of the future, and he was taken around by this couple. And I remember one using incident. They were walking along about the 16th upper level in this wonderful city, you know, where they had streets up at the top. And
so was Raymond Massey, wasn't it?
It could have been.
Yeah, Raymond Massey was the
young man of the future.
The young man of the future. He was also the father of the older man. The Shape of Things to Come.
Well, that was Shape of L. Brendel wasn't in that film.
And L. Brendel was there, and he kept on saying, "Oh, give me the good old days." And they walked along. They saw.
It wasn't L. Brendel. It was the English.
No, wait a minute. They saw, but this one, they saw a slot machine, like a night deposit bank.
That was the Metropolis.
Yes. Was it?
That was Metropolis.
You watched this
very old one.
Young couple come along, and they put some money in a thing, and then the thing opened, a little baby came out, and he said, "Oh, give me the good old days." And at the same time, in that picture, there were planes shaped just like little Piper Cubs, and there were traffic cops and sort of balloons, and on these cross sections of the street, he'd hold up his hand, and all these little planes would stop and hover. And they were made, if you can follow me, like a cross, you see, with a fuselage and two wings and a tail. And there was a hole in each wing, and there was a hole in the middle of the tail. And there were propellers stationary in those holes in each wing and on the tail. Made a triangle, see? And they had a propeller in the front, so they went forward. When they were told to stop by the cop, they cut off the front propeller, and they turned on these three propellers in the holes in the wings, and the plane remained just hovering. Right? It's a very nice concept, science fiction concept.
I thought it was right from a science fiction story illustrated by Frank R. Poe.
Well, all right. Now, I've asked many engineers. I was rather interested in that, and I said, why doesn't that work? They said, it's impossible. And I sat in a restaurant in Washington at the beginning of the war, yes, and it was explained to me, you know, poor little boy, which indeed I was, because I knew nothing about engineering, how it is impossible for such a thing to work. Because so and so and so and so. Now the darn thing is working.
Of course it's working.
Well, the bumblebee can't fly either.
Well, wait a minute.
Oh, that's famous one is the bumblebee.
When they told you this, when they told you this was a helicopter working at the time.
Oh, sure.
It was.
Oh, yes, they
Well, then I don't understand how. Well, there's another story that Willie Lay tells. He was out at one of these test ranges where they, were going boom, boom, boom with a big gun. Yeah. And they were talking about exceeding the speed of sound. going to Mach 2 or something like that. And they said, no, it's absolutely impossible. A solid object cannot go through the air at that speed. And he looked at one of these shells going off at Mach 3.
That's right. The famous story is that you can't exceed the speed of sound, and people have been shooting off pistols and rifles and
all these things. I don't know. I mean, you fellas doing a lot of talking around here. This craft that you've drawn a little outline of it for us, and you've been talking about, Ivan, has been used on the planet Clarion for a long time.
Where is the planet Clarion?
In our solar system. It's behind the moon.
It's behind the moon, I see. It's behind the moon? How far behind the moon? I want to find it so big it's
I can't divulge that information this morning.
It's behind the dark side of the moon.
That's
yes. Oh, astronomy, what you've got to learn yet.
Well, you see, this goes round and round. First of all, a science fiction writer produces such an idea. Then they make a movie of it. Then we are told categorically by engineers that the principle will not work. And then everybody says it will work. Why haven't they got it? Or has they got it? There is your way to stand stationary in the air. Get rid of all these stupid vanes that you have flashing around on the top. And egg beaters and so on. Oh, wonderful. I know, but no, I'm not any kind of aeronautical engineer. Why don't they make something like that?
They do make something like that, or very close to that. The only trouble with it is that it takes a little more power than a straight helicopter does now. If they get a little more powerful engines, it'll be very easy to do.
Oh, that's the
It's a little inefficient still.
I see. It's just a question of...
Well, you don't have very large airfoils there spinning. And you still have to push against those wings. In straightforward flight, it should work very well, as a matter of fact. It might have a little more air drag, but it should work that way.
You can close those holes off with the propellers in. I suppose the real difficulty is to how to fit the propeller in, isn't it?
Well, you've got that.
The axle goes up and down.
You remember, if you can't have too large a windmill in there.
No, you cannot. But, am I right in saying that the faster the thing goes, the more lift it gets or not?
Well, depending on its shape, up to a certain speed. Remember, at Mach 1 and so on, some of the standard airfoils begin to lose their lift. But up until that point, they gain lift with speed.
Oh, you know what I'm working around to, don't you? I'm still coming back to my engineer's alleged design of this.
I know, and I've got one of your questions that I'm going to answer before this program's over, so help me.
Well, shoot.
And you said categorically, will somebody please accept or deny the possibility that the Germans were working on this? From all the evidence, having taken the people on one side who say that they were, and who somehow or other were not connected very intimately with the project, at least in the head of the project, and on the other side, having taken the opinion of the people who were connected with the head of the project, such as von Braun and so on, I categorically deny that the Germans were working on these things.
Has anybody ever asked von Braun? Or Urban?
He's been asked just about everything by now.
Yeah, but the point is that
he also reads these articles.
there's a very fine book called The Last Days of Hitler. And in it there's a certain, you tend to think of Germany as this fantastically efficient, monolithic state. And in The Last Days of Hitler, by Trevor Roper, he points out that during the last 2 years of the war, Germany had something like 415 separate intelligence services. And they finally decided this was highly inefficient. They were going to put it under one man. So they organized all the German intelligence services, and they put it under one man, who turned out to be Admiral Canaris, who's been a British spy for the last 10 years. I mean, so it's a fantastically efficient system. It's quite possible that German scientists were working on something, as it happened in the United States, and the guy around the corner was working on something else and no one knew about it.
In fact, it would be more possible in a highly departmentalized and highly over-organized German setup than it would be even here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fantastic bureaucracy. Like, in the height of the war, I think there were 14 factories that were still producing chocolate in Germany.